Japanimation Station.
'Hello and welcome to Japanimation Station, an anime podcast brought to you by Sean Chapman
and Jonathan Lack.
And we are here to step into the Grand Tour, the Grand Tour, the Grand Tour. That's right, we're here once more to step into the Grand Tour of anime. This week on the show, we bring you an exciting podcast, because this is no normal podcast. No, this is a shadow podcast, where the loser of this podcast shall suffer a fate worse than death. They shall have to watch Dragon Ball GT all over again, from the very beginning. And to set the stage appropriately for our Shadow podcast, we today are, of course, talking about Yu-Gi-Oh! But we're not talking about the Yu-Gi-Oh! You might be thinking. No, we're not talking about Yu-Gi-Oh! Duel monsters, that, bullshit, the man's Yu-Gi-Oh! The Yu-Gi-Oh! That Konami wants you to watch, so that it can sell you some paper cards, you chumps. No, we're talking about the real Yu-Gi-Oh! The OG Yu-Gi-Oh! The people's Yu-Gi-Oh! We're talking about the original animated adaptation of Yu-Gi-Oh! Simply called Yu-Gi-Oh! Because it needs nothing else. This is the 1998 animated adaptation of Yu-Gi-Oh! By Toei Animation, which adapts the pre-Duelist Kingdom era of the manga, which again is what Konami doesn't want you to know about, because they don't want you to know the truth, which is that Yu-Gi-Oh! Used to be actually kind of cooler maybe than it was all about just one card game. It used to be about like a bunch of other shit, and then people died and it was awesome. And that's what we're here to talk about today. Maybe not as much the death, that's not so much in the anime, but it was definitely in the manga. And I'm very excited because this is a really cool show. It's maybe not like a masterpiece necessarily, but it's such an incredibly endearing show. I think especially if you grew up with Yu-Gi-Oh! That I had a lot of fun coming back and kind of revisiting the early Yu-Gi-Oh! Memories, as well as the delightful additions that this show makes, along with the rough edges, that all the rough edges that the show has, and it has them, I just found made me kind of like it even more in a weird way. But Jonathan, how do you feel? You're a big Yu-Gi-Oh! Man. Where are you at with this Yu-Gi-Oh?
Well, first off, usually when it's one of my episodes, you don't prepare that elaborate an introduction, so that was great. Yes, so for people who don't know, I was a huge Yu-Gi-Oh! Fan as a kid when it was, the 4Kids dub airing on WB. I was into the card game. The manga was really the first manga I read in depth. It's the reason I started reading Shonen Jump when Viz did the monthly magazine, and that's what got me into Dragon Ball and One Piece and all the other, I read Naruto back in the day. I didn't get super far in it, but it was in the magazine too. So that era of shonen anime, like Yu-Gi-Oh! Was my entry point into that. I've seen all of the original, TV show in its dubbed form. I've seen most of it in Japanese. Some of the filler stuff near the end, I didn't go back and rewatch, but so I've seen the show multiple times. I've read the manga multiple times. People who follow me online might know my whole Yu-Gi-Oh! Kill Count project, which was first a Twitter thread. Then when Twitter died, I went, I should archive this. So it became a much better, more fleshed out thing on my Substack, jonathanlack.com, where you can go find how many people die in Yu-Gi-Oh! And it's way more than you think, not just in those first 7 volumes either, because, Kaiba kills 2 guys in a helicopter in a very John Woo move. It's great. It's, the manga rocks. And so I've always loved Yu-Gi-Oh! But there has always been this one weird part of the series, which is this original 1998 anime produced by Toei Animation, the big men on campus over at Toei, who did these 27 episodes of Yu-Gi-Oh! Plus 1 short film, and then, for whatever series of reasons, it went over to Studio Gallop, and they made Yu-Gi-Oh! Duel Monsters, which is the anime based on the Duelist Kingdom arc through the end of the manga that ran for 224 episodes and was big worldwide while the card game got big. And then, Gallop has been making anime spin-offs that have aired every week in Japan since. It's one of those things like One Piece or Naruto that just, even once the series is over, it keeps airing every single week, And so Yu-Gi-Oh! Is a big deal, but there is this weird case of the 1998 anime. I've always wanted to watch it in full, and this podcast was a good excuse. And I agree with you, Sean. I think, because this show's reputation is that it's like the lost Yu-Gi-Oh! Because it's never been re-released outside of VHS. It aired on TV, it got a VHS release in Japan, and it was never distributed outside of Japan. It's never had a DVD release in Japan, it's never had a streaming release. It only exists through fan preservation of tapes. And when that happens, your normal reaction would be this must, and there was a popular successor, like this must be the bad lost version, and it's always been made fun of online because it does have weird things like Kaiba having green hair and stuff like that. But it's not. I agree, it's not a masterpiece, but it's a really good show. I mean, we're going to talk about this later. It's got one of the best voice casts, ever assembled for an anime. So that alone, even if you don't care about Yu-Gi-Oh!, if you just like seiyuu, if you like listening to Japanese voice actors do their work, you kind of owe it to yourself to watch this anime, because it's kind of a masterclass. And yeah, it's got all sorts of rough edges and weird elements about it, but I think it is very endearing. I don't think this is a version of Yu-Gi-Oh! That could have continued and done the Duelist Kingdom and Battle City stuff. I don't think it was really built to do that. But for what it adapts and how it does it, again, not perfect, but a lot of fun. And if you have any fondness for Yu-Gi-Oh!, it's a must-watch.
Yeah, and it's fun for me because I have a different relationship with Yu-Gi-Oh! Just in the sense that I never kind of stuck with it. We're both the perfect age for Yu-Gi-Oh! When it came over here. I remember very distinctly the Yu-Gi-Oh! Thing I ever got involved in was when the card game came over. I have a very, very clear memory of going with my friends to 7-Eleven and getting the starter decks where you had the Dark Magician starter deck and the Blue Eyes White Dragon starter deck. And so they got, if you were a loser, you got the Dark Magician one. If you were a kid who knew anything, you got the Blue Eyes White Dragon one. Because early Yu-Gi-Oh! Was not a very sophisticated game, and it's very the Blue Eyes White Dragon card is just better. There's absolutely no reason why you'd want to use the Dark Magician. There is no advantage to it in OG Yu-Gi-Oh! I'm sure eventually there are synergies with later cards that got added that maybe you could build the Dark Magician themed deck, but early Yu-Gi-Oh! Was not so complicated that was really a thing. You wanted the card that had the biggest number and good magic cards and trap cards, and that was it. And so my relationship to Yu-Gi-Oh! Has always been very similar to my relationship with Pokemon, which is that for me as a kid, it was a game thing first, and then it was a show, etc. second. So I really was into the trading card game in elementary school and middle school. And then sort of through middle school, kind of aged out of it and moved on it and didn't sort of stick with it anymore. And I watched the anime, but I didn't watch it obsessively. So I've never seen all of it in a row. I've probably seen most of the Duelist Kingdom arc when I was a kid. Although only the dub. I've never watched a whole episode of Yu-Gi-Oh! Duelist Kingdom, Duel Monsters, the popular show in Japanese. I know that cast. I've heard clips, but I've never really watched a whole episode of that one. But after the Duelist Kingdom stuff, it's very spotty. I've seen episodes of the Battle City arc, but I don't, for instance, know what happens with the God cards. I never really got to the part where I figured out what Merrick's deal was, other than he was an asshole. That's about where I kind of stopped, was maybe about a fourth through the Battle City. And then I never really got through and saw any of the Egypt arc. I kind of know that it happens, but that's where I kind of stopped with Yu-Gi-Oh! But the one other part of Yu-Gi-Oh! That I did engage with, weirdly enough, is the OG manga, because like you, I had some of the old English language versions of Shonen Jump that came over, which had some Yu-Gi-Oh! In it, and was what the hell is this? What's going on with Murder Yu-Gi-Oh! This is awesome. And then I bought the translations that came out. And so I read most of the pre-Duelist Kingdom era of Yu-Gi-Oh! In manga in English when I was in middle school. And I did not read a lot of manga. I was much more a comic book guy at that point. And so it was one of the few manga that I owned and read a lot of. And that was a real pleasure of watching this show, was bringing those memories back of right, This is because this is like the thing that I think I liked about Yu-Gi-Oh as a story. I never really connected that much with the anime when it was about the card game, partially because it's not really about, if you were into the card game, the anime was always slightly weird because it didn't really represent the card game in a way that felt like it made sense. Obviously there are reasons for that when you think about the timeline of when did the card game come out and those rules, which are not necessarily with the anime, right?
Well, and also Takahashi, the mangaka, is writing a story, not a game.
Yes.
He's doing something dramatic, and so like any
when
kind
you're
of
a little when you're a little kid and you're playing the card game, you don't give a shit. You don't know any of that
Right.
stuff. You're like, what is going on? Why are they constantly breaking the rules? None of this makes any sense. So I never really got into that side of it, but I really, really enjoyed the early version of Yu-Gi-Oh! And so there was a part of me watching this show that was like, this is my Yu-Gi-Oh! Like, this is the Yu-Gi-Oh! Outside of the card game that I actually really like and have a lot of affection for, because I really like the format of OG Yu-Gi-Oh! Of there's some, like, 80s movie style bully asshole who shows up, he does something ridiculous, and then Yugi turns into Dark Yugi or Yami Yugi, whatever, however you want to refer to him, the Pharaoh, and then absolutely fucks that dude up with some random game that's either an invented game or is a sort of parody or like, kind of file number sanded off version of a popular game like Magic the Gathering or like Dungeons and Dragons, what have you, or like the capsule stuff. And that was like a format that I really enjoyed. Obviously a format that could not continue endlessly the way the card game thing can. But there was a real joy I had watching this show in particular that kind of brought me back to that part of Yu-Gi-Oh! That I did really like a lot as a kid, that obviously had a very short life compared to the card game anime, but this was the thing that I really liked. So I've started like rereading that manga, not like rapidly or anything. I'm only on volume 4 in my reread. I'm in like the Death Tea stuff. But it has been very fun for me to kind of rediscover this thing that I have probably not engaged with any Yu-Gi-Oh! Stuff directly since like early high school. It must be the last time I touched anything Yu-Gi-Oh! Related. So this was very fun for me to kind of come back to this stuff.
And I would recommend to you or anyone else to continue reading the whole manga. It's very good. It's such a great manga. And like, if you've only seen or been exposed to the anime stuff, like, while the manga does change a lot, obviously, because the characters evolve and it becomes more about duel monsters and all of that, it is more consistent in the manga form. Like, the violence stuff does not go away in the way it does in the anime. Like, Yami Yugi is still killing motherfuckers on Duelist Kingdom. There's the big dude who kidnaps Kujaku Mai, or My Valentine in the dub, and then Yugi duels him. And in the manga, he fucking, like, makes the guy hang himself on a noose. Like, it's like walk the gallows. So there's like, this stuff happens, Bakura rips Pegasus's eye out in the manga and kills him, so there's that kind of stuff. But also like the format of early Yu-Gi-Oh! Of these kind of like shadowy morality plays becomes like the broader structure of the super arcs. And the idea of characters sort of evolving into their best selves. I think like the main 3 character arcs in the show of Yugi, Jinochi, and Kaiba are extraordinarily well done in the manga. Like, and Kaiba and Jinochi basically both wrap up at the end of Battle City, and then the Egypt arc is the wrap-up for both Yugis. And it's a very good character-themed story that if you enjoy kind of, your sports anime, game anime stuff where they, are playing one kind of competition, it's very good at that. Takahashi was very good at writing those stories dramatically. And also, I think, like, in praise to him, not worried too much about whether it maps onto the real game, because at a certain point that would be very boring. So yeah, it's a great manga, and I will pay it tribute here. But yeah, this is the 1998 show, and as you said, Sean, like, I first read these manga stories over 20 years ago. And so seeing them animated, which, I guess I could have gone and seen these at any time at a certain point, although some of the better VHS rips have only been made recently. It was like a crazy blast from the past to see, like, because how often do you have a manga you read that long ago and then only now get to see the anime? It's awesome.
Yeah, and in some ways, it being like weird VHS rips, it makes it even better when like the tape skips and shit like that happens. Like there's something about that was like the analog nature of what you're watching, even if you're just watching a downloaded version of it online. Those things are still there in the image, and there's something like kind of delightful about that as well. Like there's a sick and appropriate pleasure to this, like, this is like Konami tried to bury this shit because it's not the fucking card game they're making billions off of. It's like, this is the real deal, man.
All right. Well, do you want to dive into the history and see the road to Yu-Gi-Oh?
Yes, Jonathan, you were obviously in charge of the notes for this one, and you have made an appropriately gigantically long notes document, and I'm excited to get into this. I added a little bit here and there, mostly in like the voice actor stuff, but
Okay.
this was you you made a lot of notes here, which is awesome.
All right, so let's do some background on the mangaka himself, Takahashi Kazuki. Unlike some mangaka that I think people know who hit a home run out of the gate with their first major series, like Oda and One Piece, or Kentaro Miura and Berserk, or Toriyama Akira and Dr. Slump, Takahashi had a long road to Yu-Gi-Oh!, which began serialization when he was 35 years old. Like, for reference, Oda or Miura were 22, Kishimoto Masashi and Kubo Tite were 24 when Naruto and Bleach started, Toriyama was 25 when Slump started, so a lot of these jump mega hits tend to come from young bucks. Takahashi, it took a little while longer. He was an artist and a nerd from a young age. He loved all the tokusatsu shows like Ultraman and Kamen Rider, canonical sci-fi anime like Yamato. There's a 2-part chapter in the manga that is a tokusatsu homage that I really wish was in the anime because it would have been so charming. It's this one where one of Yugi's friends starts dressing up as a superhero and going out to do vigilante shit, and then Yami... Yeah,
that's not just tokusatsu. It's 1 part tokusatsu, 1 part Spawn, because it's 90s,
right.
It's 90s edgy American
Yes.
comic books is what he gets into.
Yeah.
That his dad brings over. And there's something amazing about watching Takahashi draw like a fake version of Spawn, because it's
Yes.
Zombire, the zombie vampire.
Yes.
It's very good.
I wish that was in this anime, but anyway. So Takahashi wanted to be an animator, and while he was in high school, he applied to work at Tezuka Productions. And estimating Takahashi's age, this would have been when that studio, which is Tezuka's second studio, this isn't Mushi Pro, they would have been gearing up for the 1980 Astro Boy anime, so he would have been like auditioning to work on that show, but they told him his skills weren't up to snuff yet, and after high school he went into corporate design work, which included illustrating pachinko machines. So that's some of his earliest work. At this time, he started drawing and submitting manga under the pen name Miyabi Hajime, which he would continue using throughout much of the 80s. At age 20, his 1981 one-shot Ing Love Ball won the Shogakukan New Comic Award, and it was published in Weekly Shonen Sunday. He spent the 1980s as a struggling artist with no single work breaking through. He published 3 more one-shots in that magazine, Weekly Shonen Sunday, in 82 and 83. And in 1986, he made his serial debut with the manga adaptation of a sports anime called Gokyu Choji Ikiman, which was published in Kodansha's Weekly Shonen magazine. For that work, he reverted to using his birth name, which was Takahashi Kazuo. And this would be one of those, manga, like a promo manga for a show. A lot of people do this, and it is a starting place for people who haven't already, gotten a giant series under their belt. Under the slightly altered pen name, he had a lot of pen names, Takahashi Kazumasa, he then published 2 one-shots in Weekly Shonen Jump in 90 and 91, and he serialized another 2-volume manga in that magazine in 1992 called Tennen Shoku Danji Burai. It was a series about a bodybuilder hitman who falls in love with a nun and becomes a professional wrestler to save her church from insolvency. Somebody animate that. That sounds fucking great.
That's a... I want to fuck animating it. I want someone to make a time machine, go back in time to the 80s and make an Arnold Schwarzenegger movie.
Yes.
That is that
my
plot.
God. That'd be perfect. All right. So again, Takahashi not finding instant success. Finally, in 1996, he began serializing Yu-Gi-Oh! In the pages of Weekly Shonen Jump under his 4th and final pen name, Takahashi Kazuki, the one he would get famous for. Again, not an instant success. Like plenty of famous long-running manga, Yu-Gi-Oh! Takes a bit to find itself. I think the manga is very good from the outset, but it tries on a lot of different hats. As you were saying earlier, Sean, it starts out more or less as a horror shonen manga, with Yugi's alter ego being explicitly murderous, and the shadow games being games of death. The general structure of early Yu-Gi-Oh! Stories involves Yugi and friends confronting some kind of bully, be they other students or teachers or hucksters, whoever, who causes a problem that causes the dark Yugi to appear, who then promptly murders, maims, or otherwise fucks with the bully through the fun of games. Each story is built around some kind of game, either one Yugi and his friends are into, like Monsters or Magic and Wizards, which is Duel Monsters, or one that Dark Yugi introduces when he comes out, and the series is largely episodic. Dark Yugi also, as we said, kills a lot of people. My Kill Count project has this scorecard at the end of Volume 7, which would be right where Battle Duelist Kingdom is about to begin. And I had Yami Yugi killing 10 people, Jinochi killing 2 people, Seto Kaiba killing 2 people, Baby Joji, which is Honda's baby nephew, not in the 1998 anime, probably for the better.
God.
He kills 1 person, and then Shoddy definitely kills a motherfucker. So, a lot of death.
The note, though, that's very funny about the deaths is that, like, it's not like it's ever lingered on. The one of that is the funniest to me, because generally these are the early ones are very, like, quick stories, right? A lot of them are just one-shot chapters, and then eventually, once, like, Shoddy comes in, you get more multi-chapter storylines. But those first 2 volumes are mostly just one-off. Here's an asshole. He does something that's a dick thing to do, pisses off Yugi. Yugi turns into Dark Yugi and basically kills him somehow. My favorite is the one and we've talked about this on podcasts on and off, because it is just by far my favorite of these, is the Culture Festival one, where the rival club president guy who is like part of the Teppanyaki Club or whatever, where they cook with the giant steel grills. He takes their spot on the cultural club festival thing for Yugi's club, or his class, like where they're going to set up their whole stands and all this shit, because they're going to make like a haunted mansion or something. And then Yami Yugi plays ice hockey or air hockey, but with explosive puck, basically, that's frozen in a puck on the grill. So then whoever is hitting it when it melts all the way through is going to blow up. The best part about that is the guy fucking dies horribly. Like, he dies an emulated death because it blows up right in his face. And then the Culture Festival still happens. And it's like, I'm a high school teacher, dude. If there was a fucking body of a student found on campus the next morning who had, mysteriously died overnight a horrible, fiery death, I think we would fucking cancel school, bro. We're not going to school. We're not having your little Culture Festival. I think, Yugi's plan would have backfired a little bit, because they definitely would not have been able to do their whole fun little class project thing, because it all would have been canceled, and there would have been police all over that school trying to figure out who murdered this child.
It's that is another chapter that is not in the 98 anime, and it bummed me out that it's not, because it's actually a really charming chapter, because Yugi and his friends make this really cool cultural, they make an arcade, they're going to do all these carnival games, everybody's so proud. It's an early Yugi Anzu story, because they're working together, and then Yugi is so mad that he turns into Dark Yugi and murders the motherfucker, and you could tone down the ending for the anime if you had to. It is a good story that would make a good episode. I was bummed that one's not in this show.
Yes, but it's just to show that, yes, there's lots of murder, but the fallout of that murder is always very glossed over.
Yes.
There's not a lot of soul-searching in the characters of all the death they have witnessed.
No.
It's just, there's, one quick page of, and here, we wrapped it up, and then it's never mentioned again, and we never find out what happens with the police investigation. That should be a spin-off manga someone makes, is with the police detective dude that's in this anime, trying to investigate and put together, who is this serial killer murdering all these young people in Domino City.
Well, you know how, now we have the kind of whole genre that is, reinterpretations of old Tezuka stories. There's the Pluto manga and anime that is based on an Astro Boy story. You had the Dororo remake that we covered. Maybe in 50 years we'll get the Yu-Gi-Oh remake that is original Yu-Gi-Oh, but it's through the eyes of a detective trying to solve this crazy crime spree in Domino City, and Yugi slowly realizing he has a crazy split personality. I'm imagining it almost like a David Fincher movie. This is Seven, but with card games.
It would be, there's a lot of unmined potential in early Yu-Gi-Oh, I think, is what we're seeing here.
So the manga was not an immediate hit, but there was one story early on about a card game called Magic and Wizards, which is also where we meet a character named Kaiba Seto, that prompted a lot of reader interest. After popularity dipped following the Shoddy arc in Volume 3, which was the series' first non-episodic serialized story, Takahashi brought the game and Kaiba back for Kaiba's Revenge arc, which is also Death T, in Volumes 4 and 5. And then after the third sort of serialized arc, which is with Dark Bakura and the RPG game they play in Volume 7, the series then entered its first long-term arc in Volume 8 and Chapter 60 with the introduction of Pegasus J. Crawford and the Duelist Kingdom story, which moved the card game front and center, and the rest, of course, is history. That is where the second, more famous anime, Studio Gallup's Yu-Gi-Oh! Duel Monsters, also just known as Yu-Gi-Oh!, picks up with a first episode that adapts parts of the 2 Kaiba stories to sort of get everyone up to speed. That show then would last 224 episodes. It sparked a global franchise, still very much running to this day, as the various Yu-Gi-Oh! Spin-offs have been on the air basically every week in Japan since the year 2000.
Yeah. One thing to note there as well is that anime also comes out after the card game comes out, right? So
Right.
the anime we're talking about today is pre the Konami trading card game.
Yes.
And that's like part of like the big thing that also shifts the franchise in that like global sense, is that card game is a massive, massive hit. Because this is very early in the history of like trading card games, right? Magic the Gathering is basically what creates the modern model for a trading card game in that style, and that's early 90s. So it's like that's part of what also happens here, is that Konami game just is insanely popular immediately and is making huge amounts of money.
Yes. The card game is called Magic and Wizards throughout the original Japanese manga, and often written in text, it's M and W, with furigana providing the reading of Duel Monsters. It is in English. Or not Duel Monsters, Magic and Wizards. The phrase is English. In the manga, the players are called duelists, and the duel terminology is there, but the game itself is always Magic and Wizards. The 1998 anime, I think this is a forgotten part of its legacy, is it is the first time the term Duel Monsters is used instead. The first video game with the Duel Monsters terminology launched in December 1998. The anime was in April, and then the physical trading card game launched the following year in 1999. So although the 2000 Gallop anime is called Duel Monsters, we might have Toei and its anime to thank for creating the term that has been widely in use for over a quarter of a century, and that name change was almost certainly due to avoid copyright issues with Magic the Gathering, which clearly inspired Magic and Wizards. Though it certainly also had the unintended upside of creating a much catchier name that helped the game become as big as it became. I love you, Takahashi-sensei, but I don't think Magic and Wizards would have been the sensation that Duel Monsters was.
Yes, and especially in the manga, it's very clear, the Magic the Gathering connection. Like, because partially it's like Magic and Wizards, to be clear. You have Magic the Gathering, but that's made by the company Wizards of the Coast.
Yes.
And so he just put those together. At the time, Magic the Gathering would have been relatively obscure in Japan, but it had come over to Japan by that point. I mean, obviously, that's part of how he would have known about it. But also the whole Blue Eyes White Dragon thing, like, that's just a, like, there's a card called the Black Lotus in Magic the Gathering that's a very infamous card that was incredibly rare. It was totally broken in terms of the rules of Magic the Gathering. It just gives you 2 free mana cards, which, if you know the rules of Magic, just totally breaks the whole logic of the game, basically. And so it quickly became a banned card, but it became infamous for being incredibly rare. You can make huge amounts of money on it. And the way that all this stuff is positioned in the manga chapter makes it very clear, like, okay, this is like the Black Lotus, only cooler because it's a big dragon. And then also you've got the whole explanation for the premise of the card game being that you are like a wizard who is summoning monster and using magic spells, and that's what the cards represent. That's just what the premise of Magic the Gathering, the card game, is you are a planeswalker who's using your magic to summon monsters. Like, the way it's explained is so much Magic the Gathering that it makes sense to me that once you have an anime being made that has all these other corporate interests involved that are funding the anime, that they would look at that and go, maybe we need to file off the serial number of this and call it something that's not just the name of the game and the name of the company put together, because we don't want to get sued.
Right. And it's not like Takahashi was doing anything malicious here. He was a big gamer, and early Yu-Gi-Oh! Is just chock full of this kind of thing where he is paying homage to different games he liked. And of course, you're writing, originally it's 2 manga chapters. No one's going to bat an eye over there's a Magic the Gathering homage in these 2 random manga chapters. But yes, once you are making a show and a card game and a video game franchise and everything else, probably good to come up with your own name for it, and that is Duel Monsters. So anyway, that gets us to the 1998 anime, the one simply titled Yu-Gi-Oh!, produced by Toei in 98. The timeline would be that the manga began on September 14th, 1996 in Weekly Shonen Jump, and the anime began airing on April 4th, 1998. By this point, the first 7 volumes were published in Japanese, and the weekly serialization would have been well into the Duelist Kingdom arc. So while it is often said that the 1998 anime specifically adapts the first 7 volumes, that's not strictly true. It mainly pulls from those stories, but does borrow elements from the then ongoing Duelist Kingdom arc, including it uses the field rules for Duel Monsters, which are not in the first 7 volumes, and the character Shizuka, who is Jonochi's sister, makes an appearance as well, and she is in the Duelist Kingdom arc. So some of that is pulled forward. And then when we get to the movie pulls a bunch from Duelist Kingdom as well. So while most anime based on manga that we talk about tend to adapt pretty closely, the 1998 Yu-Gi-Oh! Is a much freer adaptation than your typical Shonen Jump anime, I think it would be safe to say. It rearranges stories, it drops many characters entirely, it adds and alters characters, and so on. Here are some of the broad changes from the manga. While it generally maintains the episodic structure of the comic, the 98 anime also turns the Kaiba story into a season-long arc by moving his introduction earlier, creating 4 new one-off stories with Kaiba's game masters, and using the Death Tea arc as the season's climax, with the Bakura story as a sort of like final coda epilogue thing. The gang is restructured a bit. While manga chapters generally pair Yugi off with 1 or 2 other main characters, if any, because sometimes the focus is on guest characters, the anime always has all 5 main characters involved in the story in some way, which is actually very reminiscent to how Lupin the Third eventually developed, where the manga usually is Lupin and 1 other character doing something, and the anime eventually, especially part 2, was like, no, all 5 of them are in every episode. And when I say 5, yes, it is 5, because you might be thinking, Jonathan, there's only 4 main Yu-Gi-Oh! Characters. What are you talking about? Yugi only has 3 friends. No.
Arguably, there's only 3 main characters. Honda's there. He's nice to have.
Yes.
But, he's definitely, I wouldn't put him on the same tier as Yugi, Jinochi, and Anzu.
I mean, but he's there. He's there with the gang all the time. That's what I mean. But yes, you have those characters, Yugi, Jinochi, Honda, and Anzu. And I will make an exception for dub listeners here, because if you're listening to this and you've only heard Yu-Gi-Oh! In dub form, I'll tell you who those are. That is Yugi, Joey, Tristan, and Taya. That's the last time I'm saying that today, but that's who those characters are. So you can figure that out for yourself. But in addition to those 4, we have Nosaka Miho. Technically, there is a character in the manga named Miho who makes 1 brief appearance. But this Miho is completely different in her design, voice, and personality, and she is sort of our 5th member of the gang. And alongside Miho, we get a very different characterization of Honda, who is no longer Jinochi's lifelong friend and fellow delinquent, but a sort of wannabe school leader who is a goody two-shoes. He's obsessed with Miho, he's on the beautification committee of the student council, and he is mostly used for comic relief. And that's got to be the most bizarre change in this show, right, Sean?
It's very bizarre. I'm not a huge fan of it. Jonathan, I'm very impressed that you remembered that he was part of the beautification club, because it's not like he mentions it multiple times in every single episode. It's a thing of where I think I understand why, in the sense of, kind of like for the reason of what I was just saying, where it's like Honda, yes, he's part of like the main group in the manga, but at the same time, he has so much overlap with Jinochi. He's just kind of like a worse Jinochi, in that like Jinochi is really badass and cool and very loyal. And then Honda's like also delinquent, and he's kind of there. And sometimes they'll give him a good moment. But there's just so much character overlap with Jinochi. It makes sense to me that you'd want to like distinguish him a little bit more. But I think what they do in making him comic relief, he just becomes a very tedious character. Especially because a lot of his running gags feel like running gags that would have worked for a one-off character in a single episode, like the Bikain stuff. Like, I'm the part of the beautification club. I'm not a janitor. What are you saying? That's fine if that's like one character doing that in one episode. It does get very obnoxious that he does that every single episode. And it's not like it's a particularly good gag in the first place. He feels like he's mostly there just to give Miho some shine, because Miho's I love Miho. I'm all in on Miho. I like her a lot. Honda, he's there, and he can be a little bit annoying.
Yeah. We'll talk about Miho in a little bit, because we're going to go through all the characters with their voice actors. But yeah, it's an interesting change. And then, while not entirely dumbed down, the anime does soften most of the darkest stuff from the manga. Yugi still does give people penalty games, but they're mostly psychological torture. They don't usually result in death or permanent damage, which I think you would expect of, this is usually what happens with these TV shows. Especially I feel like that era of shonen adaptations, if you look at early One Piece also, which is Toei, tones down the violence quite a bit. Not to the level, again, of the 4Kids dubs, which did, shadow games instead of death, and in One Piece they had, the hammer gun and all that stuff, instead of real guns. But even in Japan, some of this stuff was dumbed down at the time. And then finally, Kaiba has green hair. No, I don't know why. He definitely would have been illustrated in color by now in the manga or in its volumes, so that's just a bizarre left field change, where they're like, you know what? Kaiba's got green hair, and it doesn't look good, but I respect the audacity.
Yeah, I agree with you that it doesn't look good, but at the same time, like when you look at Yugi's whole hair setup, maybe they're just feeling bad that Kaiba's hair is not flamboyant enough.
Yeah.
Because every time I look at Yugi's hair, I don't understand it. Like, I still don't, I'm an adult man now. I still don't understand. I don't know what the blonde parts are. Are they made out of metal? Like, why do they look different than the rest of his hair? I don't know. It's very weird.
It looks cool as shit. I still think...
Yes, the difference is it looks cool. It's confusing. Like, Kaiba's green hair is confusing, but at least for Yugi, it looks cool. For Kaiba's green hair, it looks very dumb.
I still say we have been robbed in this era of live-action anime adaptations over in Japan that we have never gotten the Yu-Gi-Oh! Movie. Like, give it to us. If you did Full Metal Alchemist, you did Attack on Titan, you did Death Note, you did all of these. We deserve Yu-Gi-Oh! We deserve it. As a people, we need it. We need it.
There's some hair makeup artists, like, who's been practicing this their whole life. They're like, I can do it. I can make it look good on camera. Trust me, I can do the fucking hair, please.
It can't be sillier than some of the stuff in those Full Metal Alchemist movies. I remember how they did Alex Louis Armstrong. It can't be sillier than that. All right. I don't know where to put this next note, but goddamn, Yu-Gi-Oh! 98 has the coolest fucking eye catches.
Yes.
Like, ever. Like, the way it goes in and out of the act break is it has the image sort of crumple up into the Millennium Puzzle and then do a cool, like, shadow pose, like, silhouette with Dark Yugi. And then for the next part, it's this, like, gradual zoom in on this crack in this, like, eye in an Egyptian wall. And then the image, like, opens up out of that. Like, seriously, one of the 10 best eye catches I've ever seen. It's, like, on the Eyecatch Hall of Fame. It's wonderful.
Yes, it's very weird that you, like... Because I generally think that a lot of the, like... format stuff around the edges of the show, like the opening, the ending, that stuff is not particularly great. Like, I don't think they look that good. I don't like the songs all that much. But like it felt like they put very little energy into those parts of the show. But they put all of that into the eye catch. Like, we're going to make this the coolest, most dynamic eye catch in the history of anime. I don't know if that was a smart use of creativity and resources.
I love
compared to the other parts, but it is very cool. It every time you get to the Eyecatch Break, you're like, hell yeah, this is awesome.
Yes. And as an eye-catch connoisseur, I just, I love these. I love it whenever anyone does something creative with it. The next episode previews also do something interesting where they preview the next 3 episodes, not just one. Have you ever seen an anime do that? I have not.
No. To my knowledge, this is the only show that does this. I think for good reason, because it's incredibly confusing. It took me a while to even figure out that was happening. Because I remember watching the second episode of the show and being like, well, where's Kaiba? Like, where's Kaiba? Because he was in the next episode preview last time. Where the fuck is Kaiba? And then me slowly realizing, oh, they're giving you the preview for multiple episodes in a row, but it's not particularly clear what the delineation is. It's only once you kind of get used to it, you can notice it. Especially once at a certain point, the third episode, the one that's like 2 episodes down the line, they just show you like character, like concept art basically, or like the character sheet art for them. Rather than give you full animated elements, because potentially those were not done enough for that episode at that point. But yes, it is very weird. I don't know why. It's very confusing. But it's interesting. I've never seen anything else do it. And maybe there's good reason why no other show has ever done that.
It's interesting, though, and it's kind of endearing in its own way.
Yes.
All right. Yu-Gi-Oh! Was released across 7 VHS volumes in Japan between December 1999 and February 2000. The film, it's a short film as one of the like Toei Anime festivals, that was released in 1999, and it saw a Laserdisc release. Then in April 2000, Yu-Gi-Oh! Duel Monsters premiered, and the original Toei Yu-Gi-Oh! Was effectively erased from history. It has never been rebroadcast, never reissued on DVD, Blu-ray, or streaming, and the retrospective timeline on the official Yu-Gi-Oh! Website, which was established for the 20th anniversary of the manga, makes no mention of the show whatsoever. Were it not for fan preservation efforts, this would be a piece of lost media, and I think that would be tragic, because this show is cool.
Yeah, I think somebody should visit the offices. I guess Konami would be the people you'd probably most blame for this. Those are the people I'm going to blame. And then play a shadow game with them and then, have them suffer a fate worse than death.
I could understand while Duel Monsters, the second show, was big, not doing anything with this. I do think it's kind of weird at this point. Like, It feels like there's got to be something more than just... I wonder if there's anything else going on in, like, the rights. Because, like... it would sell. Like, people would be interested in this. It's a Yu-Gi-Oh thing. Like, more than most anime you could put out on DVD or Blu-ray, like, there would be an audience for this, I think, right?
Yeah, well, because I was kind of looking around a little bit about, like, the fan reception of the show, and in Japan, it's, like, it's well regarded by the people who had seen it.
Yeah.
Like, it's an obscure show, even in, like, Japan, from what I can tell. But, like, if you look up, like, clips of it on YouTube in Japanese, there are lots of comments of people just, like, talking about how nostalgic it is, and they like the terrible themes, the opening theme for the show. I don't like that theme, but they like it. They've got a lot of nostalgia for it, because they saw it as a kid. And so, yeah, it does feel like it would sell. Like, there'd be no good reason not to do it. Then it just kind of feels like there is this concerted effort by the corporate interests involved to coalesce everything around this vision of Yu-Gi-Oh! As a brand that I think has the trading card game as the center, because that is the thing that makes the most money. And that's just kind of always felt like that is what the Yu-Gi-Oh! Thing became, is that it was so focused on, we got to create the new show because we got to make a new set of cards to sell that to people because we got to keep on putting out new cards forever. And that is feels like is the impetus of the franchise. And if that's your impetus, if that's the thing that you're doing, that's what your perspective is on the property, then you're not going to want to release this, because the only thing in this related to the card game is this weird old version that is not the rules at all. It just doesn't align with that sort of your brand synergy, if you're thinking of it from the perspective of someone who wears a suit 24/7. I think that's probably where that's coming from.
It's probably right. But again, I think like enough time has passed. And for instance, we just got the Konami release of the Yu-Gi-Oh! Early Days collection, the video game that collects a lot of early pre-card game Yu-Gi-Oh! Games. And I wonder if there's like a little bit of a thawing on that, of being like, you know what, it's history. History will not hurt the current brand, and like nostalgia might be even good at this point for sales and stuff. So who knows, maybe one day it would be cool. One final note on Takahashi Sensei himself. I just want to, pay tribute to him because he did pass away in July 2022. This was just as you and I were preparing to launch Japanimation Station on August 1st of that year. He was found dead off the coast of Okinawa, having apparently drowned on July 4th, while assisting in the rescue of 3 people caught in a rip current. Because of that timing, we've always wanted to do some kind of tribute episode to Takahashi and his work. The timing never quite worked out because we had big seasons that were on other topics. So we hope this episode does a little bit to convey that, because I think he was a remarkable mangaka. His imagination and enthusiasm for social gaming was so vast that he just offhandedly created one of the single biggest and most influential card games of the modern era. There are few creators whose work have played a bigger role in pushing anime into the mainstream worldwide, and if you go back and read that original manga, which remains the definitive version of the story, you'll see what a prodigious talent he was in both art and storytelling, and I think it is safe to say that at least one of us, which is me, would not be here talking about anime and manga, let alone studying it as a career, without Takahashi's influence. He was also a fucking boss who once encouraged his fans to oppose Abe Shinzo in the 2019 elections with a cartoon on Instagram showing the Dark Magician and Dark Magician Girl declaring, "The current administration is betraying its own country," and saying, "I really wonder if Japan's future will be okay," while Dark Yugi in the Instagram caption says, "All duelists, now is the time to vote for justice." He later issued an apology for getting too political, because mangaka usually don't do that with their own creations and their sort of corporate interests and all of that. But he also pointedly refused to take down the cartoon. It's fucking boss shit. Takahashi, you were a real one.
Yeah, that is very badass, because as you say, that is a big faux pas, particularly in Japan. There's like a reason why you don't see that kind of stuff very often, but that's very cool. Yeah, and while I don't have like as deep a relationship with Takahashi's work as you do, it has been a really great reminder going back and reading the manga, just how good he was as a mangaka.
Yes.
The art is so fantastic, and I really like the early art style. Eventually it gets more angular, which is fine. I think it gets easier for him to draw, which is why it gets a bit more angular over time, because he needs to get more efficient with it.
That happens with a lot of mangaka over time. I mean, even Toriyama by the end of Dragon Ball had gotten very angular.
Yes, but the first couple of volumes have a very rounded style. Particularly, there's a lot of stuff like the first couple of chapters where characters basically look like different characters. Like Honda looks like such an absolute scumbag in his first appearance. It's the greatest. If you haven't seen it, it's so good. He revises that character design very quickly. But it's just, if you want to look at the most dirtbag Honda / Tristan, if you're a dub guy ever, look at his first appearance in the manga. It's fucking great. And it's one of the things that's fun about this show is that it does feel like it has a little bit of that influence still in there.
Yes.
That like Yugi's hair is not just like a starfish on his head. It's got like weight to it. There's like a little bit of bend to it. That is more kind of like that earlier style. You've got that like absolute gremlin look that Yami Yugi originally has. Even a little bit of the, like, he has no nose in his first few appearances, which is, he's got a kind of Krillin look. Eventually puts the nose on there more consistently. But I think it's like to give him this like vicious, otherworldly kind of appearance, and you get more of that in this anime. And something that's fun about the anime is that it represents this earlier style of the Yu-Gi-Oh art that I have a lot of affection for, because it just feels like it's got a different look. It's just got a kind of a grimier aesthetic to it, and a slightly more human look. Because it's also where you have some of the almost Junji Ito-esque horror manga influence with like when people get fucked up. They're like, they scream. It's like basically just like a character from a Junji Ito manga. And that's great. And it's, like watching Kaiba lose his shit because he experiences death and he looks like, someone out of any horror manga you might pick up. It's pretty good.
It's very good. Absolutely. So let's talk about the crew that made this show, because the cast is particularly full of heavy hitters, but the crew also is no slouch. This was not like they gave Yu-Gi-Oh! To the B team. This is like a lot of really good people. So let's talk about them. The series director on Yu-Gi-Oh! Was Kakudo Hiroyuki. This was his first series director role, but he went off of this to then direct Digimon Adventure and Digimon Adventure 2. So big deal over there. The only other TV series he directed was Super Robot Wars OG Divine Wars in 2007. Otherwise, he has been a career Toei employee, directing and storyboarding on shows like the original Dragon Quest Adventure of Dai, and he did later come back to do some stuff on the remake, Slam Dunk, Dragon Ball GT, One Piece, and so on. After he stopped doing active series direction, he also branched out to do storyboards for other studios, which has been most of his work since then. It seems like he just likes storyboarding, because he works with like Studio Gonzo on Hellsing, or Zebek for DN Angel, stuff like that. And he does continue to work on Digimon to this day, directing and storyboarding at least a little bit on basically every show. Most recently, he did the opening for Digimon Ghost Game in 2021. So if you like Digimon, this is one of those guys.
Yes. And it makes a lot of sense to me that the guy who directed this show would go on to direct Digimon Adventure, because Digimon Adventure is more serialized than this. But I think some of the things they do to like bring Kaiba in as a more like series-long villain and stuff like that, like some of the vibes of it feel a little bit like Digimon Adventure, and how they're trying to blend the kind of a serialized longer storylines and character arcs with individual episodic stories that are very like, every episode is going to have Yugi turn into Yami Yugi, and here's a transformation scene. That, Digimon is a show like that, where it's every episode you're going to have a Digivolution scene, and you get Braveheart plays, and they do their big move, and they defeat the bad guy. Like, it's got that kind of vibe to it, so it makes a lot of sense to me that it's the same guy making both those shows.
100%. Then we've got our series composer, and this part took me so long to research, because this guy is a fucking character. This is Inoue Toshiki. Series composer, again, means the main writer on the show, and in this case wrote most of the episodes. He is the son of screenwriter Igami Masaru, who was famous as the original series writer for Kamen Rider, and he is the father of Inoue Akiko, who is also an anime screenwriter and novelist. Funnily enough, the bulk of Akiko's anime credits are on the show Duel Masters and its various spin-offs. Duel Masters started its life as a direct adaptation of Magic the Gathering. So Inoue Toshiki is the second generation of a three-generation anime and manga and tokusatsu writing family, which I think is hilarious. So Inoue Toshiki started writing sci-fi stories for his college's Fantasy Literature Research Club, which caught the eye of Toei producer Keizo Shichijo, which led to an offer to write episode 24 of Dr. Slump Arale-chan in 1981. That is the original Dr. Slump adaptation. And that's while Inoue was still a university student. Since then, he's had a very illustrious career, not only in anime, where he's been series composer on shows including the original Ranma 1/2, Galaxy Angel, and Death Note, but also as an episodic writer on everything from Urusei Yatsura to Fist of the North Star to The Dragon Balls to City Hunter to Full Metal Alchemist 03, but he's also a major figure on the Toei Tokusatsu shows, including many modern entries in the Super Sentai and Kamen Rider lines. And he is apparently quite the character. His Japanese Wikipedia page is unusually long and full of details not only about his writing style, but his personality. One amusing anecdote is that at age 29, he went away to India and spent several months in a temple, becoming a monk. He claims that his real name is Swamidian Munesh, or meditating sage in Hindi, and that Toshiki Inoue is not only his pen name, but was his name in a former life, which is relevant to Yu-Gi-Oh! In all sorts of weird ways.
Yes, it is his Mo Hitori no Boku.
Yes.
It's very good.
Indeed. Inoue broke his wrist once in an arm wrestling match with Wakamatsu Toshihide, the star of Chojin Sentai Jetman, which is one of the shows Inoue wrote for. He almost wrote a film directed by Kaneko Shusuke, who's a famous Japanese director, before getting in an argument with a Nikatsu executive and getting himself fired. And he is a heavy smoker who, when working at Madhouse on some of their anime, refused to abide by their no-smoking policy, leading employees to say the building was a no-smoking zone except for Inoue's vicinity. What a guy! What a fucking life story! Like, make an anime about this man. This is great. Those
are some crazy details. Also, just learned that Madhouse has a no smoking policy. It's Madhouse. Look how smoky the vibes are of so many of your anime. Like, come on, what are you doing?
I didn't know any anime studios had a no smoking policy, because my image of an animator is pencil in one hand and cigarette in the other.
Yeah.
Maybe that's because I know a lot of like pre-2000s Japanese animators. I'm sure a lot today are more health conscious.
Yes.
Anyway.
It makes me think of the shot from the set of Godzilla, of the original Godzilla, of the dude in the Godzilla suit with the top half off, just standing there on the set fucking smoking a cigarette.
So good. Then for character design, we've got another set of heavy hitters, because the character designers on this show were Araki Shingo and Himeno Michi, who are one of anime's most celebrated and storied sets of character designers. Araki debuted on the original Ashita no Joe anime as animation director, and later worked on other Nagai Go adaptations like Devilman and Cutie Honey, and he was the major designer on many of Toei's early magical girl animes of the 1970s. Araki met Himeno Michi in 1973, and they've collaborated ever since, most famously on the show Saint Seiya, which is where, like, their design aesthetic, if you want to know what the Shingo Michi, like, touch is, or the Araki Himeno touch is, it's Saint Seiya. You have characters in this show who just look like Saint Seiya characters. Mm-hmm. That's why. Other credits they've done, though, would include Rose of Versailles, Galaxy Express 999, or 999. We talked about them with Lupin the Third Part 3, and lots of others. And notably, they are the only lead creatives from the Toei Yu-Gi-Oh! Who moved over to Yu-Gi-Oh! Duel Monsters, where they filled the same role. So they were the character designers for both of these anime. And that seems weird at first until you watch the 1999 movie, and you see them coming much closer to the designs that they would use in the 2000 show. So we've got those guys. For our art director, we have Nobuto Sakamoto, and for art design, we have Nakamura Mitsuki for all 27 episodes, and Sakaki Koji for 14 to 27. Then on music, this one also took some research, because the music is credited to BMF. Now, what is BMF? Are they a band? Are they something?
Kind of bad nothing. Motherfuckers. That's what BMF is. They're bad motherfuckers. I assume that's what it stands for. I don't know.
I don't think that's what it stands for. It is a credit for the record label / music production company B-Zone, which manages many artists and does a lot of work for anime theme songs. In the 90s, they worked on Toei with shows like Slam Dunk and Dragon Ball GT 2, which is why the theme song artists for Yu-Gi-Oh! Are also the theme song artists for DBGT. But starting with Slam Dunk, they also provided the background music soundtrack, and same as on Slam Dunk, no individual artist is credited for that period of the show. And so on Yu-Gi-Oh! It's just credited to BGM. As far as I can, or to BMF. As far as I can tell, B-Zone did not do this on a ton of anime outside of Slam Dunk and Yu-Gi-Oh! Mostly they are credited for music production and managing the artists who did the theme songs. So effectively, this is a credit to whoever was at the company who was assigned to work on Yu-Gi-Oh! And I do have to say, the music is where this show suffers most in comparison to the second anime, because Yu-Gi-Oh! Duel Monsters has, if you've never heard the Japanese, it's the dub never used any of the original soundtrack. And that original Japanese soundtrack is fucking killer. It is so good. Absolute banger after absolute banger. Yu-Gi-Oh! 98 is not quite Yu-Gi-Oh! Dragon Ball GT levels of bad. It has a couple of good tracks, usually when Yami Yugi comes out, but it sounds extraordinarily cheap.
Yes, I definitely think the music is the weakest part of the show. I think it's quite bad. You're probably right that it's not quite as bad as Dragon Ball GT, although at least Dragon Ball GT could always lean on just put on an instrumental version of Dan Dan Kokoro Hikare Teku, the opening theme, and that can kind of get you through whatever. Now, GT, part of the problem with the soundtrack is it leans on that so hard that you get just very tired of hearing that same instrumental version over and over. But yeah, there's probably nothing quite as bad as like the circus song that plays in GT in the fight scenes throughout the whole show, including at the end when like the Earth's going to get destroyed and it still sounds like you're like lining up to go see some elephants bouncing on a ball or some shit. But yeah, it's not good in this show. Like I think the song track that's most disappointing to me is the Yami Yugi transformation song, which is fine, but it should be great. Like that's like if that's your job, if you're doing like if we're thinking about fucking Digimon Adventure, if you've never seen the Japanese version of Digimon Adventure, it plays this song called Braveheart every time they digivolve, and it's so fucking good. It's just an all-time banger, a great piece of music. And that's the kind of thing you need. If you're going to have your show be like every episode is going to have some sort of transformation scene or something, like Sailor Moon. You know, Sailor Moon doesn't have anything as distinctive as Braveheart, but you hear, if you've watched a single episode of Sailor Moon and you hear the song that plays when Usagi transforms, then comes out and gives her whole speech about like, you know, I shall, in the name of the moon, I shall punish you and all that stuff, it gets you super pumped up. And here, it's just this very, like, kind of dull song that plays every time that he transforms, and it's just a bummer. It's a huge missed opportunity, and the soundtrack, is just not very good.
And the second anime has exactly what you're talking about. The music when, like, Dark Yugi comes out in the second anime is like this big orchestral sweeping, like, it's the Pharaoh is coming. Like, it's big and it's cool. And it has lots of moments like that. So I agree. It needs more juice on the soundtrack. Our opening and ending themes are from B-Zone artists who also worked on GT. The opening is A Dry Yell by Field of View, who also did Don Don. And the ending is Even If You Were to Break Tomorrow by Wands, who did the final GT ending, which was called, again, these guys like their long titles, Let's Blast Through This Moment with a Rusty Machine Gun. And I gotta say, here's the thing. I have known these songs for like 20 years because the song A Dry Well, Kawaitai Sakabi by Field of View, that's the theme that Little Karibo used for Yu-Gi-Oh! The Abridged series. So like if you've seen any of like Yu-Gi-Oh!'s online life, that song's always been big. So I guess maybe I just can't speak to them objectively. I like these songs. I don't love them. I don't think they're great, but like I do enjoy the opening and ending here. I think they're like good, solid songs. But I know you do not. So
I think the ending is fine. Like the ending totally works fine for me. You know, I like the moment in the episode before Death Tea happens where all the characters are walking through the mist and the song starts playing. Like that's a good moment, right? Like the song works for those moments. It's not like an amazing song or anything, but it works fine for what it is. I think A Dry Yell is the one that I just particularly don't like. I just don't think it's a very good song. It's like, I think it's got this quality that it kind of sounds like the vocals sound like from like a bad Green Day song where there's this like fine line I think you need to walk if you're doing this kind of vocal style, which is very different than the singer sounds in Dan Dan Kokoro Hikare Teku because it's a different sort of genre of song. But where it's got that like kind of pop punk style that can, if you don't, I think, land it right, kind of feels very grating to me and very whiny. And it's that like da 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 da. It's the way that the voice falls on the end of those lines. It just, and maybe this is because I spent all my time with fucking 14-year-olds as a high school teacher, but it just sounds like the way that teenagers intonate when they are complaining to you. It's like, mister, do we have to do we have to work today? That's just what that song sounds like to me constantly. And so that's the thing that gets it grating. I also just think the like instrumentation doesn't work very well. Like during the verse, the whole like kind of middle space of the song feels so open and empty. Particularly, it's worse on the VHS versions we have because I think the audio quality is not super great. It sounds like a little bit better on like the movie where you could kind of hear the guitar part in the verse better. But even that, I don't think fixes the problem of the song just feeling so kind of spacious and empty. But the melody that the vocalist is doing and his style is not good enough to carry the song. So I don't particularly like it. It is obviously it is not, while it is the same band performing it as Dan Dan Kokoro Ikare Teku, it is not the same composer as that song. So it is no surprise that it doesn't hold up to that song because that song is phenomenal. But Dry Yell, not a fan. Don't like it.
I like it okay, at the end it goes, okay, fly at higher game. It's stuck in my head. I like it.
Yeah.
It's silly.
Fly at a higher game. I spent my whole time watching the show being like, what is that supposed to mean? Like, what is fly at a higher game?
Fly at higher game, Sean. It's what you got to do.
It's a riddle more difficult than Millennium Puzzle. What does it mean, fly at a higher game?
In terms of our episode directors, I'm not going to go through all of these other than to note that our series director, Kakudo Hiroyuki, he directly directs episodes 1, 6, and 11, and then he storyboarded 4, 16, and 21. I did also want to call out that there's a director here, Hosoda Masahiro, who directed 7, 13, 23, and 25. And he's an old school Toei vet who's worked on basically any Toei show you can name. And most recently is maybe notable for directing Dragon Ball Z Battle of Gods, which was the movie that brought Dragon Ball sort of back to life in the modern era. And then he did also cross over to work on Yu-Gi-Oh! Duel Monsters, where he directed 20 episodes from around the start of Battle City onwards. And then he also was the chief director on one of the recent Yu-Gi-Oh! Spin-offs, Yu-Gi-Oh! Vrains. I don't know how you're supposed to say that. Is it Vrains? I don't know. I haven't seen it. And he was the chief director for the first 13 episodes of that show. And then we've got Yamada Toru, who did episodes 8 and 22, who also directed one episode of Yu-Gi-Oh! Duel Monsters. They directed the third episode. That is where Insector Haga throws Yugi's Exodia cards into the ocean on the ship to Duelist Kingdom. But nobody else involved in the show worked on Duel Monsters. But those two directors did. So there you go. Did you find out how to say Yu-Gi-Oh! Vrains?
No, but I did look at images of Yu-Gi-Oh! Vrains, and that didn't help me at all.
Okay, thank you. Now let's talk about the cast, because Jesus fucking Christ. This cast, my God, Sean, is it an overstatement to say that when you combine the main recurring ensemble with the episodic guest stars, this is one of the best vocal casts we've ever seen?
Yeah, it's pretty nuts. Like, at a certain point, it just got ridiculous with the guest stars, where it's like, how many Dragon Ball Z like main characters can you get into the show? At a certain point where you had like Vegeta and Frieza were basically back to back. I'm like, what the fuck's even going on? But yes, the voice cast for this show is killer, from main cast all the way down to like one-off baddies, including like occasionally you'll just get, partially because of where it's like positioned in the late 90s, you'll occasionally get like here's like someone right before they got very big kind of quality to it as well. Which is always fun.
So yeah, let's talk about we'll do the main ensemble here. This is like the main 8 or so characters who recur throughout the show. When we go through the individual episodes, we will call out some of the individual guest stars where they show up, because most of them are in just one episode. But let's go through these because, man, oh man, and we can also talk about their characterizations on this show. But we start with, as Muto Yugi himself, Ogata Megumi, true anime royalty, Kurama Yu Yu Hakusho, Hakusho, sorry about that, Shinji in Evangelion, Ken in Persona 3, Yuta in Jujutsu Kaisen 0. Oh my god. I mean, one of the best to ever do it, and I think her performance as Muto Yugi and as Yami Yugi is tremendous. Like, she is so good, and I particularly think, like, her voice as Yami Yugi is so cool. It is, like, low, sultry, like, scary, this, like, gremlin voice. But also the way she modulates it over the course of the show, where, like, I think her little Yugi performance gets better and better and better. And there are some episodes near the end where she is a knockout as little Yugi. And then as Dark Yugi, also you can hear her, like, at the beginning I would have said, this is a great voice for early Dark Yugi, but I couldn't really hear it doing, like, Battle City Dark Yugi. By the end I could, because she's doing stuff like the RPG arc or the final duel with Kaiba, which are the models for all the future Yu-Gi-Oh! Stories, and she modulates that so well. Like, by the end of this, I really want to visit the alternate universe where she did the whole show, because, my god, she's fantastic.
Yeah, it's like, And for me, it started immediately from the beginning of episode 1 when the episode title comes up. They have her read the episode title in the Yami Yugi voice. And that's where like my mind was blown immediately because I knew that she was Yugi in the show. But for whatever reason, I hadn't thought about the fact that that means she's playing both versions. So in my head, I was like, oh, little Yugi's going to sound like Shinji from EVA was kind of like what I assumed would happen. And then the episode title comes up and she reads it. And I know you haven't seen Yu Yu Hakusho, Jonathan, but she's basically using the same voice she used for Kurama in terms of where she places it in her throat.
Right.
And so as soon as I heard that, I'm like, a light bulb went off in my head. I'm like, oh, shit, of course, she's playing Dark Yugi. And what does Dark Yugi sound like? Basically, like, pissed off Kurama from Yu Yu Hakusho. Which little Ogata Megami trivia, for people who don't know, that was her first role in any anime ever, was as one of the 4 main characters of Yu Yu Hakusho, which is fucking insane. And she's so good in that show, and she's so good here. And yeah, it's really amazing because how well she's able to play both sides, right? The little kid Yu-Gi-Oh, which is probably the most adorable Ogata Megami has ever sounded to me.
Yes.
Like her little, like, she's in a very, like, Kid Goku, Nozawa Masako kind of space, with just how, like, kind of adorable this little kid is. She sounds, it's a very similar to, if you've seen Sailor Moon R, the movie, she plays the little kid version of basically Tuxedo Mask when he was like a little boy in that movie. And it's a very similar kind of sound to the voice, and it's really good. But then when she transforms, she just so nails that super cool but kind of like dark and mysterious quality that Yami Yugi needs, particularly early on. And like you, I remember we talked off the air briefly about the show at one point. We're both like, God, she's so good. Like, and we both were like, but I can kind of see why they would recast, because we're both halfway through the show at that point. I'm with you that once you get to the end and you see her at the very end of this show and then in the movie little thing they did, you can totally see how she just slightly modulates the performance to get that more heroic version of Yami Yugi, and how natural that shift feels, to where it feels like character growth, that the character started as this kind of murderous little imp man inside of Yugi who just wants to fucking fuck people up. And then now he, in his own right, really cares about all of these people, and he's become much more heroic, and she totally nails that shift. And yeah, it's crazy. I just think it's an absolutely amazing performance. While, you know, me reading the manga at the same time as watching the show, it's just like so evident why she's cast, particularly for Yami Yugi, where the way that he speaks is a little bit like, it's slightly exaggerated. Like, he's got a lot of little affectations in the way he speaks that gets shaved off a little bit as the show goes on. Like, he's, you know, very like, he's written so much as this little like punk motherfucker early on that's just saying things to piss people off, and the way that he says in Japanese is written that way, and she nails that so well. And then the way that she modulates it bit by bit as that changes, and the anime kind of replicates a little bit how that characters are written differently, partially because they're just quoting lines from the manga as the show goes on. It's great. It's just a 10 out of 10 performance. And yeah, I've heard the guy from Yu-Gi-Oh! Duel Monsters, but only in clips, so I don't have any real attachment to that performance. And it's really kind of sad to think that, like, if I wanted to go on and watch that show, that this would not be the voice for Yugi, because I'm so attached to it at this point.
I totally understand. There's this scene, when you're talking about her modulation, it's in episode, it would be 24, right? Yeah, 24, 25 to 60, yeah, 24, the last episode of Death Tea, where Yugi is getting ready to go duel Kaiba, and you have little Yugi do his monologue about, you realize he's been holding in Dark Yugi. There's a reason Dark Yugi hasn't come out yet. And he says, I'm scared I'm going to lose you guys as my friends. And the way he plays that she plays that, Ogata, is stunning. But then the transition when Dark Yugi comes out and turns back, and it's the first time he's ever addressed the gang directly as Dark Yugi, and said, like, Jinochi and Anzu and all of that. I got chills. Like, I got like, oh my God, this like hit me. And so as someone who has seen all of the manga canon parts of Yu-Gi-Oh! Duel Monsters, I will make a determination for each of these, which is the better voice. And I will say for this one, I think it's Ogata. Now, I don't think it's a completely fair comparison, because the character in the role changes a lot, and the two performances are going for something totally different. In the second anime, it's Kazuma Shunsuke, and it's really the only major anime voice he's ever done. And I do like him. He's very good. The goal of the performance is totally different. Like, for one, Kazuma is a man, and Ogata was a woman. So, like, Yugi sounds like an actual high school boy in that anime, and Yami Yugi sounds like a young man. It's a little different. He's got a much louder, sort of more forceful take on the character, and it does work. Like, I've watched that anime and I enjoy that voice a lot, but I think you've got to give it to Ogata. I mean, like, I think part of it is that little Yugi, I think that's the clincher for me, because I don't think Kazuma ever brought little Yugi to life as vividly as Ogata does. She's one of the best to ever do it. We've said before, she might be on the Mount Rushmore of seiyuu, and there's a good reason for that. I wish there were an anime with her doing it the whole time, because she's amazing.
Yeah. I mean, it is like a Nozomi Masako's Goku sort of like I'm kind of watching the show for the performance in some respects, for like the episodes that don't hit, because there are episodes that I really do not particularly like of this show. Like, it has some bum episodes. Most of the episodes are good, and some of them are great, but there are a couple of bad episodes. But even then, like, I still just enjoy getting to this performance and hearing her play the character and both sides of the character so much that even if the episode is on its own not that good, I just enjoy that performance so much, in the same way that when I've recently been rewatching lots of Dragon Ball stuff, in the wake of Toriyama passing away, and rewatching some original Dragon Ball, being like, yeah, some of the filler episodes you get of the original Dragon Ball aren't great, but you still get to hear OG Goku Nozomi Masako. Like, that's so good that, like, whatever, if the episode's not great, like, I'm just here to hear this fucking voice.
I agree, and there's lots of other voices. So let's continue on with Yugi's rival, Kaiba Seto, who is voiced by Midorikawa Hikaru, who is also true anime royalty. We've talked about him before because he's Hero Yui in Gundam Wing. He's Cade in Slam Dunk, Marth in Fire Emblem, Akihiko in Persona 3, Lancer in Fate Zero, Android 16 in Dragon Ball Z, the second-gen Tenshinhan in Dragon Ball, taking over from Suzuoki Hirotaka, Captain Bright. Lots and lots of things. He's a legend. And he's so good. And this is the harder one, because here's the thing. I'll tell you right now, who's the better voice? It is the second anime. It's Suda Kenjiro. Suda Kenjiro is a legend, and Kaiba is his most iconic performance. And if you listen to him do Kaiba for 5 seconds, you go, oh my god, he was born to do this. So when you compare Midorikawa, like, in retrospect, it's an unfair comparison, and yet I also want to go visit the alternate world where he did all of Kaiba, because he's so fucking good. Like, oh my god, this is a great take on Kaiba. Like, I think early on, he's able to sell in a way that Kenjiro is never asked to do. Like, Tsuda, his voice for Kaiba is always older, because it's the conception of the character where he's like a full CEO. But in the Yu-Gi-Oh! 98 anime, you start with the idea that maybe he's just a normal kid, and then the evil, like, comes out over time. And the way he's able to play both a Kaiba who could trick people that he's socially well-adjusted, and then the evil Kaiba falling apart. Oh my god, and like when you get to near the end of the anime and he's starting to say all the lines that Suda Kenjiro would say, like doing the full Blue Eyes White Dragon, or Hokaki no Basto Stream, like all of that stuff. Oh my god, I loved it. And I just love that this is one where, like, I'm just glad we have these two separate performances that are both so good. And it was very fun to hear Midorikawa put his spin on this.
Yes, because Suda Kenjiro's Kaiba is the performance from that show I've heard the most, because it's kind of, if you see like meme clips, especially like the Japanese community, which is mostly how I know the Yu-Gi-Oh! Duel Monsters Japanese cast, is like VTuber references that I go look up the clip and be like, oh, this is crazy. Like the next episode preview where Jinochi dies. If you don't know that, it's one of the funniest fucking clips in the history of the internet. It's so good. But that's my main exposure to that cast. And Suda Kenjiro as Kaiba, it's like incredible. But Kaiba is also the character that is the most different, just in his conceptualization of like who the fuck this guy is. Because obviously he's originally designed to just be a one-off dude who shows up in the fake Magic the Gathering chapters, and he's another student at Yugi's school, which is a thing I just totally forgot when I was rereading the manga. I'm like, oh, he's supposed to be in Yugi's class, like he's supposed to be Yugi's same age. That feels like that's a thing that is not true about any other appearance of this character ever.
No, they put him in Yugi's class in episode 1 of Duel Monsters for a brief scene, and I've always had to read it as he is hanging out there as like he's spying on these kids or something, because Yu-Gi-Oh! Duel Monsters Kaiba is a 30-year-old man. That is how he is played. That's how he is. He's a 30-year-old man. He is not a teenager.
Yeah, and so, but the Midorikawa performance in this starts with more that kind of Kaiba. So it's where it sounds so different than what Suda Kenjiro is doing, because the character is almost a different character. Not completely different, but it's a very different idea of who this character is. But then, like with Yugi, slowly as it goes on, he gets closer and closer to the Kaiba you think of. Then especially when you get to the movie, that's basically him doing If This Was Kaiba from the Duelist Kingdom era.
Yes.
This is what he'd sound like. And he's so fucking good there, too. And it's that kind of thing where it's like, I just realized that, like, oh, you can't sell these guys short. You can't just be like, oh, because he was cast for this idea of what the character was, he's playing that character for most of this show. That doesn't mean that he couldn't also do a home run performance if they change it up, because obviously Midori Kawahikaru is fucking incredible. If there's one thing, though, I have to say that is a huge bummer about this show, this is not his fault, this is that they fucked up in the adaptation, is that they never put in the moment where he rips up the fourth Blue Eyes White Dragon.
Yes.
Because that's the thing I was most excited for, because this is also Hiro Yui. This is the guy that, if there's two things that Hiro Yui and Kaiba have in common, is that their favorite fucking thing to do in the world is maliciously rip up a card right in someone's face. So it's like, and the fact, for people who don't remember, at the end of episode 1 of Gundam Wing, Hiro Yui receives a birthday invitation from Relina, the heroine of that show, and he fucking rips it up in her face, wipes a tear off her cheek, leans into her ear and whispers, "I'm going to kill you." And it's the most Kaiba thing any Gundam character has ever done. And I need somebody to create whatever mashup you need to give me the scene where Kaiba rips the fourth Blue Eyes White Dragon up in front of Grandpa Muto's face, wipes a fucking tear off his cheek, leads in his ear, and goes, "I'm going to kill you." Because it's what I needed, and I was so bummed that he doesn't fucking rip up that Blue Eyes White Dragon card.
Because I actually rewatched this morning before we recorded the first episode of Yu-Gi-Oh! Duel Monsters just to get that voice cast in my head again. And Suda, I mean, he eats that scene for lunch. It's so fucking good, because that is in that episode of the anime is where he tears up the fourth Blue Eyes. And yeah, so like this is one where like if we do the Who Is Better thing, I'm gonna give it to Suda because it is like it's him. But like, for the love of God, do not sell Midorikawa short. He is phenomenal here. It led me to write in my notes, Kaiba is the Hamlet of anime. I don't know if I can fully defend that statement, but when you've got two actors this good giving like spins on the character this rich, that's what it felt like to me, of like comparing like Shakespeare performances where like you're not trying to say who's the better Hamlet. You're like, oh my God, we've got these multiple interpretations of Hamlet. And you know, maybe it is Kaiba, you know? He fucking kills his stepdad. I don't know if I can fully justify this, but, you know, it's a funny idea.
Yes, I think Hamlet has much more of a conscience than Kaiba does.
That's true.
The point of Hamlet as a character, he spends most of that play trying not to kill his stepfather because he struggles with the morality of the whole thing. Kaiba wouldn't need a reason. He'd just murder that guy for fun.
He kind of does anyway. Moving on, as Janochi Katsuya, or Joey Wheeler, if you know the dub terms, we have, again, just the hit after hit after hit. It keeps coming. We've got Morikawa Toshiyuki, who you would know as Sephiroth in Final Fantasy VII, Ubuyashiki in Kimetsu no Yaiba, Dante in Devil May Cry, Naruto's dad in Naruto, Ichigo's dad in Bleach, and we're about to see him again as Griffith in Berserk 97 with one of his most legendary performances. Jesus Christ, this feels like he's overqualified, you know? Yeah. But it results in a tremendous performance as Janochi. And like opposite Ogata Megumi 2, like their chemistry, absolutely killer. Perfect interpretation of this character. In the second anime, Janochi is voiced by Takahashi Hiroki, a perfectly distinguished actor in his own right, who also is tremendous in that show. This is kind of like the Midorikawa Tsuda thing, where I don't think you're putting either actor down, but I do gotta give this one to Morikawa, guys. I think he gets a little more of Janochi's hard edge, of his humor, and I really found myself wishing I could hear him play the entire part, from Janochi's early rough edges to him being a very conscientious hero by the end of the manga, who has honestly surpassed Yugi in some ways. He's the better duelist by the end of Battle City. Like, I wanted to hear him do the whole thing because it's fucking Morikawa and he is so good. Yeah,
this was maybe the performance that kind of took me most like off my guard, because I'm not super familiar with Janochi's voice from the main show. So I didn't have as much of like a thing to compare here, whereas like the other ones like Yugi and Kaiba, I very much know what those voices sound like. But this, where Janochi is just kind of a character that I think partially coming from the English language side of things when I was a kid, he's just like the Yamcha of Yu-Gi-Oh! Is kind of how I always like think of him. Like he just kind of felt like a little bit of a meme character. And I think that's mostly just like the English performance kind of like infecting it in my head.
Yeah, it's because they gave him a dumb Brooklyn accent and had him, they characterized him as an idiot, which he is not. He's like, yeah.
And so watching this show is like, it brought back all the memories of the old early manga that I had read and been like, right, Jinochi's supposed to be a complete fucking badass. Like, he's so cool. He's unbelievably cool in this show. I mean, he's kind of an idiot at the same time, right? Which is part of what makes him cool. But you have stuff like the episode with Dragon Lee that they kind of change a little bit up, where it comes in here as like this weird lead into Death Tea, but where he just like beats the shit out of this like weird Bruce Lee impersonator. And the fight's a little bit different, but he has his like hands in his pockets the whole time and it's just fighting the dudes with his feet. And then he fucking like has the soda can in his pocket that he pops open and sprays the guy in the face and then kicks his ass. It's like so cool. He's basically just Yusuke Urameshi from Yu Yu Hakusho. The characterization, it's so similar to that. And yeah, Morikawa just kills it. It's such a great performance. I feel like you get the whole human of who Jinochi is there. Even when they've sanded off a little bit of like the harsher edges around the character, they still include the scene where you stumble in on his fucking alcoholic dad and stuff.
Yes.
And I feel like Morikawa's performance has a lot of that in there, where you feel that like the dude is kind of lonely, that he comes from this really rough background, but he's trying to kind of make the most of what he has, and he's so loyal and cares so much about his friends. Like, it's just a killer performance that I think just gets that whole character, where like it rewrote my conceptualization of the character in my brain that was so infected by weird, dumb Boston Joey that I'm like, no, Jinochi is cool. He's a badass. He's like the best friend in anime. If you want a good friend, you want Jinochi. And if you want him to have a voice, you want him to have Morikawa's voice. Even if that is also Sephiroth's voice. He's more, a little bit like Naruto's dad when he was a kid. It's kind of what he sounds like, and it's great.
Yeah, it's great. And for those who haven't read the manga or don't remember kind of how his story goes, I mean, the thing that Yu-Gi-Oh! Duel Monsters, the second anime, kind of cuts it off at the knees a little bit with Jinochi, and I think is why maybe English fans had that conception that you had, Sean, is that you don't have the early stuff where Jinochi is solving all his problems with his fists. Because his whole arc is that he is a badass, and he can solve most problems by beating people up, but that creates more problems for him and his friends also. And so he starts following in Yugi's footsteps as a duelist, and discovers he's actually very good at it, at using his mind to kind of solve these things. And my big hot take on Yu-Gi-Oh! Is that he is the best duelist in the series. When you get to the end of Battle City, the thing is he is a more natural talent at this than either Yugi or Kaiba. The coolest thing that happens in Yu-Gi-Oh! Is he comes one card away from beating Merrick in the finals, and he only loses because Merrick fucking cheats. Like, Jinochi would have beaten the big bad of Yu-Gi-Oh! Before Yugi got to him if Merrick didn't fucking cheat. Like, there's not a lot of shonen anime where, that kind of thing happens, where, Vegeta doesn't usually get to claim, I'm about to beat the villain, but then they cheat, and now Goku's turn. It's no, Goku's actually stronger. And it implies very heavily also, we don't see the final duel between Jinochi and Yugi, but it implies that Jinochi wins, that Jinochi surpasses Yugi. So, that's his arc. And I think you can hear that in what Morikawa does, where, this is a guy who is going to be redeemed by this friendship, and all of that heroic badass energy inside him is going to come out into a different kind of greatness, where he will, even on the level of talent, surpass his mentor. And that's my strong feeling about Yu-Gi-Oh! Jinochi is the heart of this thing, and I want the anime remake where we can hear Morikawa do the whole thing.
Yeah, I mean, it's a great character. It's a great performance.
Yeah. Then another one I really like, we've got Kakazu Yumi as Masaki Anzu. This would be Taya in the English. She made her voice acting debut as Sala Tyrell in Afterwar Gundam X. That's one of Jamil Neat's operators, and also his love interest in the series. They get together at the end. She was also Dante in Full Metal Alchemist 03, the kind of big bad of that show. She is also in FF7 because she is Yuffie. She is Shizuka in Doraemon since 2005. She was Fujisaki Akari in Hikaru no Go. And I think this portrayal of Anzu is great. I actually think this is my favorite version of Anzu in any Yu-Gi-Oh! Media, because it's basically her character from the manga, but just a little more hard-edged and kind of sassy. I don't know how you would say it, but like she's just a little more take no shit. And I love it. Like, because I think Anzu's characterization in the second anime is very flat. And like, I think the manga generally knows more what to do with her, but generally she kind of falls in the, like, sort of the Honda place of being like on the sidelines while the main characters do shit. But like, I think she's really well written here. I love the Anzu focused episodes. And I think Kakuzu's performance is like so endearing and fun and funny. She's just great. The voice in the second anime is Saito Maki. She's very good. But I do think this one goes to Kakuzu, like, easily. I think it's just such a distinct performance. Saito's voice in that second anime is more of sort of your traditional anime voice for this kind of character, the childhood love interest. And I just think Kakuzu Yumi's performance is so distinctive.
Yeah, I think it's a really strong performance for this character because it captures that energy that Anzu has, which is like she's not there to be someone's love interest, you know? Like, yes. It feels like she's so, like, strong and cool of a person in her own right. Right, like her whole like dream of I'm going to go to New York City to be a dancer and stuff. Like, there's just such like an inner strength to the character that's portrayed there. That my memory of the Duelist Kingdom stuff, and again, this is all in the English dub. Who knows? I've never read that part of the manga, never saw the Japanese version there. But she just feels like a character that then becomes I'm on the sides just to be a love interest, and that's it. Here it just feels like they get so much more of, and this is just because like the stories get to involve her more because it's not all just dueling all the time with the card game. She just gets to feel like she's this really cool person who's pursuing her own dreams, her own interests, and is not just sort of like pigeonholed as this one character archetype. And I also do think when we talk about Miho, it is one of the things that Miho helps do as well is it gives another female character in the main cast that gives Anzu like more contrast for Anzu. So you have like multiple conceptions of who women are here in our like group of characters, and gives Anzu another female character to bounce off of. And I think that's one of like the really important roles that Miho plays, is it helps balance the whole cast in a way that reading the manga, and again, I'm at volume 4 with the Death Tea stuff, it's like there's something about like it just being a sausage fest that you just got the 3 dudes and then you've got Anzu on the side, and she just kind of feels like she's very isolated as a character because she doesn't have her own friends in any way. It feels like unbalanced, and it's a thing that I don't think is a huge problem for the manga, but it's one thing that it helps kind of give Anzu more to do in more relationships in the show when they have another female character in the mix.
Yeah, I think I would agree with that. And I think you're very right about Miho. Like, she gets to get more of the, for lack of a better term, kind of the girly characterization that is like yes. more stereotypical. But then you're also able to take that stereotype and subvert it and have fun with it and do crazy things with Miho on the side. And then Anzu gets to be a strong character who also, like, I like this part of Yu-Gi-Oh! Where you explore that, like, it's not a one-way crush. She is deeply attracted to Yugi in a very real way. Mm-hmm. At first, it's dark Yugi. Her arc over the course of the series is seeing little Yugi as a man, too, which understandably is hard early on when he has, Ogata Megumi doing like a little kid voice. Not usually going to see that person as a, sexual partner. But anyway, I do think, like, for instance, they do the episode that is one of my favorite chapters where they go to the amusement park and there's the mm-hmm. bomber and everything. And she's great in that one. I love seeing her, like, play with her attraction to Dark Yugi, all that stuff. Very good. So I would give this one to this anime as well. Then we've got Honda, which is the weird case where you have this weird characterization, but the actor is great. I mean, this actor is Okiayu Ryotaro, who has been many, many things. He's Nagisa's dad in Bleach. He's Scar in the original Full Metal Alchemist.
That's in Clannad. I was adding things here, and that's after I put Byakuya in
Sean,
there. I fixed your Byakuya mistake.
Okay. Well, Sean, that is because I'm like Ron Burgundy. I just read what's on the notes, and you fucked me up. So I just assumed I've never seen Bleach. There could have been a character named Nagisa with a dad in Bleach. What do I fucking know? But anyway, Okiayu is also Scar in OG Full Metal Alchemist, Andrew Wallfield in Gundam Seed, Bring Stabby and Divine Nova. Am I saying those right? In Gundam
I think it's actually, if I remember correctly, this is a typo, an understandable typo because it's not a word. I believe it's Bring Stabby is the name of that character.
Okay.
Right, these are I forget what they're called, but they're like basically the Cyber New type equivalents in Gundam 00 in the second season.
A character you might know better would be Trei's Krusha Renata in Gundam Wing, one of the 4 Gundam boys, Hisashi in Slam Dunk, Kukichi in Bleach, Alucard in Castlevania, Zero in Mega Man X, and Kokushibo in Kimetsu no Yaiba, and also Toriko in Toriko, but I don't know if anyone remembers that.
And the Bleach one, this is, I even fixed it in the notes and you fucked it up again. You can't just call that character Kuchiki, you have to call him Byakuya, because Kuchiki is his surname, and he's the older sister of the female lead of that show. So there's 2 characters.
Well, I've never seen Bleach.
Byakuya. Yeah, well,
Okay.
That's why I fucking put Byakuya in there, and you didn't read that part. So,
all right,
because
well,
originally you
Byakuya
just had
and Bleach.
Kuchiki and Bleach, and I fixed it for you, and then you fucked it up again.
Point is, Okiayu is a great voice actor
Yes.
with a long and storied career, including a shit ton of Gundam stuff where we've talked about him before.
Yes.
And I do think it's a good performance. Like, I think the characterization is weird, but I do think, like, Honda would make me laugh, and it was mostly the performance is funny. Like, I think it's just a naturally funny performance. And I think he probably could have been good as a more down-to-earth version of Honda, too. It's hard to say. The second anime actually had 2 voice actors for Honda. You had Kondo Takayuki do him in the first 51 episodes, and then Kikuchi Hidehiro do him for the rest of the show. I think if I have to pick one Honda voice out of those 3, I think it's Kikuchi, the third Honda, who sounds the closest to my conception of that character in the manga. It would be cool to hear him get to play the whole thing. But again, not a perfect comparison because they are effectively playing different characters.
Yes, yeah, and like I think Okiayu does well with the material he's been given. The problem is the way the character's written is not particularly inspiring. But he does what he's asked to do, and he does it well.
And then finishing up the sort of main gang, we've got Nosaka Miho, who is voiced by the single-name actor Yukana, which is the stage name of Nogami Yukana. She played Fuyumi Irisu in Hyoka, which is the senpai who manipulates Oreki in the student film arc. She plays Mei Ling Lee in Cardcaptor Sakura, Tessa in Fullmetal Panic, Kale in Dragon Ball Super, and she is the recast of 4 Murasame in the Zeta Gundam A New Translation movies. So lots of cool stuff that we've seen her in before. And honestly, the performance is kind of what makes this character work for me, because I think it's a very funny, lively, energetic performance of a character who I think on the outside looks like she could be a lot more grating than I think she actually is.
Yeah, I end up liking Miho a lot in the show. I think there's, especially as you get deeper into the series, there's something of where I think they do a good job of writing her as this kind of Mean Girls-esque character where she, on the outside, just seems like this sort of like airheaded, like hyper-feminine girly girl type. But in actuality, I think she's like very like clever and she's very conniving at getting what she wants, right? Like they write her as if she is ignorant of Honda's affections, but of course she is actually just very actively and targetingly using his affection for her to get him to do the thing she wants him to do. And as you get deeper into the character, I think you see more of how like she's actually very clever and very you kind of like sneaky in the way that she like kind of like lives her life. And there's something about that I like a lot that is very endearing. And you get some of those later episodes like the Capsule Monster episode that more prominently features her. And there's they give her some like really good stuff to do. She doesn't get sort of like pigeonholed as a comic relief character, even though she provides a lot of comic relief in the show. She just feels like a character that has multiple sides to her that you can see, and that's really good. And that Yukana just does such a good job of playing it, right? She's got this very like kind of shrill, girlish voice, but in a way that is legitimately, I think, quite adorable. It's very similar to her Tessarossa, Captain Tessa voice in Full Metal Panic, just a little bit maybe less girl genius. That character has that quality. So it's got a very adorable sound to the voice, but you start to become more cognizant of the ways in which she is intentionally sounding that way in order to manipulate people. And I think you kind of plays that dynamic of the character really well.
Absolutely. And I think the show is generally pretty good at finding ways to build her into existing stories.
Yes.
Like, I actually think the RPG arc near the end benefits from having her for a couple of moments that actually improve on the manga by having that 5th character in the mix, and that's kind of cool. I think early on in the early episodes, she's a little repetitive with the Honda stuff, but I would say the Capsule Monster one is a turning point where they start finding new ways to bring her into stories. And yeah, I liked her by the end a lot. And I understand why Yu-Gi-Oh! Duel Monsters does not use Miho, because A, she's not in the manga, and B, I have no idea what they would have her do on Duelist Kingdom or in Battle City. But for this anime, definitely like having her there. It's a weird thing. There's not many anime where you can say they like just added someone to the main cast, but didn't necessarily alter the stories that much. But like, it works. It's good writing.
Yeah, I think if they had kept her around, she would have found some way to she would have beaten Pegasus in like the first half of the Duelist Kingdom. She would have wandered her way into that castle. She would have outsassed Pegasus and fucking killed him, and it would have been great, and it just resolved the whole thing.
Okay, I take what I said back. I do want to see her go toe-to-toe with Pegasus J. Crawford in a sass battle, because that would be great. Moving on, we have Aono Takashi, who is a actor we've talked about many times, playing Muto Suguroku, who is Grandpa Muto. He would be probably best known to listeners of this podcast as Piccolo Daimao and Kami-sama in Dragon Ball. He's also Shiro Sanada in Space Battleship Yamato, Rihaku in Fist of the North Star. He was the original voice of Dracul Mihawk, the great swordsman in One Piece until his death, so that role has been recast. He was Colonel Roy Campbell in Metal Gear, Muramasa in Ninja Gaiden, and the official dub voice of Joe Pesci, which you can very much hear in his performance as Grandpa. It is a aggressive character voice, and I think it's very fun. I do love Aono Takeshi. I do think in this case, this is one where the voice in the second anime is an actor named Miyazawa Tadashi, and I do think I probably prefer that voice because it's just toned down enough that Grandpa can be more of a main character integrated into the ensemble. Whereas, like, I did think when we get to, like, the Death Tea stuff and Aono is, like, giving Yugi the cards and stuff, I don't know if that voice works for that scene in a way that Miyazawa's voice as Grandpa does. Taking nothing away from Aono Takeshi, fucking legend, but that would be, like, if I had to pick one, it's probably the second series, but I did enjoy hearing him here, particularly in the first couple episodes where Grandpa's just an old weirdo.
Yeah, because this is one where it feels like they cast him for that role of like the weird old dude in the card shop that shows up every couple of episodes to talk about a game. And then, then all of a sudden he's having to be on his like fucking last breath being like, Yugi, you must believe in the heart of the cards and all that. And yeah, it gets I'm with you that the voice doesn't quite work there. But I that feels like an issue with how they kind of cast for the character rather than like, I can't really blame the actor there. It just feels like the character ended up in scenes that they didn't fully think about when they cast him or something. And I don't think I've ever heard what the original Japanese version of the character sounds like. But what you're saying makes sense in terms of how you would truly kind of position the character differently if you were casting him for the other show, which like part of the inciting incident for that show is his soul gets captured or whatever the fuck that Pegasus does. Which again, this version of that performance doesn't quite make sense for that sort of character.
No. Then we do have Kaiba's little brother Mokuba, who appears a couple times in this show, voiced by Miwa Katsue, who is one of the older actors in this cast. She performed as kind of a character actor from the very earliest anime in the 60s in all sorts of roles. She just passed away last year in 2024 at age 80. But I do, with no disrespect to Miwa, who I think is good here as little gremlin Mokuba, but in the second anime, they got Takeuchi Junko as Mokuba. That is Naruto himself, and that's a fucking level up because holy shit. And I do think like Takeuchi Junko is great in that second anime, playing both Mokuba's kind of earnest side, but also his little shithead side, and that is very fun. I did enjoy, though, hearing here Miwa's, again, just total gremlin voice in a couple of scenes. It's very funny.
Yes, because this is one where I feel like the conceptualization of the character is very different because he's here just to be a little piece of shit. I wish that they adapted the part in Death Tea where they play Russian roulette or whatever, which is also where Mokuba is just a little fucking bastard.
It's so good.
But there's also like a weird Gundam brain poison I now have that when I watch an anime and hear someone say Mokuba, I expect to see the fucking white base.
I do too. It's the same thing.
That's obviously what Char in the Zeon Forces call the white base after the Trojan horse, which is Mokuba means wooden horse. And so whenever anyone said Mokuba, I'm like, where's Captain Bright? What's going on?
Indeed. And finally, last but abso-fucking-lutely not least, oh, this is so good. As Bakura Ryo and his evil counterpart, we have Kashiwakura Tsutomu, who was Glemmy Toto in Gundam Double Zeta, and he's in a lot of other stuff. But honestly, I don't know if I need to list anything else because he's just doing his Glemmy Toto voice as evil Bakura, and he is so fucking good. Oh my god. The last two episodes of this show where Bakura is slowly, like, he's going from being a shit-eating villain who thinks he's on top to just getting his ass handed to him. I was like cackling with glee. This is a phenomenal performance.
Yes, like I think this performance just makes those last episodes so fun. As you
Yes.
say, it's particularly like when he becomes the dungeon master, he just like locks into like such a great performance of evil Bakura, like both being a shithead, but also legitimately like progressing the game and going on his computer and all that stuff. There's something where he just captures that energy, and then slowly, once the game starts unraveling, and he starts losing his ground, and the way the character just slowly starts losing his shit, it's so good. And then when he fucking does the most iconic Bakura thing ever, where he impales his own hand on the fucking castle spire.
Yes.
It's just, oh my god, yeah. Like I just was like you, I was just cackling. The performance is so good. It's just he gave 110% for those last couple episodes, and it's fucking fantastic.
It's fantastic. And this is one where, like, I definitely think he is the best voice of Bakura. We've had 3. So in the second anime, initially the character was voiced by Inoue Yo, up through episode 41, but she sadly developed lung cancer around this time and had to drop out. She eventually passed away in 2003, and the role was taken over by a very heavy hitter in Matsumoto Rika, who is the voice of Satoshi, or Ash Ketchum in Pokemon. And Matsumoto Rika is a really good Bakura. It's actually like eerily similar to what Ogata Megumi does with Yugi in the 1998 anime, where it's this very young, high-pitched boy voice and then the kind of dark and sultry adult version. She's fantastic. It kind of makes you imagine an alternate world where they had put Ogata in the Bakura part for the second anime as like an homage. But I do think of the 3, Kashiwakura is the best. He's the most unique by far, the most sinister, and I think the one that feels most distinct from Yugi, which I think the character needs, because he is the evil Yugi. He's another figure from 5,000 years ago who inhabits a Millennium item, who has possessed the soul of a young boy, but instead of helping that young boy make friends and, become a hero, he has taken all the souls of that boy's friends and made him become a villain. And I do just think, like, again, no disrespect to Inoue or Matsumoto, who are both good in different ways. I think Matsumoto particularly does a good performance in the second series, but I really wish I could see Kashiwakura do, like, the final arc with all the ancient Egypt stuff as Thief King Bakura. That would be so cool.
Yeah, because I think that's part of the thing is that's what this performance feels like, even though this is like well before any of that would have been like clear. He feels like he's some weird ancient fucking bandit let loose in our world just having fun. But he doesn't, like, it's just the way in which he lacks the kind of like class and dignity that Yami Yugi has. It's such a good contrast with our 2 weird ancient Egyptian souls inhabiting modern bodies. It's just so good. And it's also, I think, the one thing that's interesting with the performance, partially because it's just the way that Bakura is used in the show, where there's like this kind of slow build to him that, like, at first I was like, yeah, this is good, but I'm not sure like what the performance is fully going for, because you just get a little glimpses of him. And then it's once you get the full, like, oh, now we're in the arc and you see what, like, we're getting the full character, the build to that performance is so strong. It's really, I think they did a good job of kind of building the character into the show to lead up to this performance, to make it feel very momentous for your last arc. And it kind of feels like Kashiwakura was conscious of the fact that this is the kind of finale arc of the show, so I gotta go big and make it really memorable.
Absolutely. So I did do a little scorecard here. I would say if I had to pick the actor I would pick from the first anime, I do think Yugi, Jinochi, Anzu, and Bakura are my picks. I think in terms of ones that are better in the second anime, I'd probably go Kaiba, Honda, Grandpa, and Mokuba. That is very funny that it is a 4-4 tie. I did not plan that. But I do think if you put a gun to my head, pick one cast out of the 2, I'd be very sad to lose Tsuda Kenjiro. But, I get Midorikawa, so fucking who cares? I'm picking the first show. I think the first show has overall the better cast. And that is amazing, because that second cast is iconic in lots of different ways, and they're great. But this show, man, my dream, like, anime at this point now would be do a complete Yu-Gi-Oh! Remake that is a faithful manga adaptation with the first show's cast. That would be so cool. You could probably do it in like 100 episodes. Let's do it. Let's make that. Come on. Let's do it.
This is our new Kickstarter we're starting here at Japanimation Station. That will definitely work. It's clear. The path is clear. We just need $50 million, and we'll definitely make this happen.
I was going to say, do Ogata Megumi and Midorikawa Hikaru do like Kickstarter money for voice acting roles? I'm guessing not, but
I bet that that's probably violates various contracts they have with their talent agency. I bet that they can't do that.
That's probably true.
Thanks for listening to Japanimation Station. If you're enjoying the show, please remember to like and subscribe, leave a review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, and tell your friends.
You can also find us over at the Purely Academic Podcast, our potentially educational variety show where we talk video games, movies, TV, and more every month. And you can read my movie reviews and follow everything we release together on the Fade to Lack Substack at www.jonathanlack.com.
And now, back to the show.
All right, Sean, well, we've talked about the main cast. Do you want to go ahead and go episode by episode here, talk about some of these individual stories?
Yes.
I have comparisons to the manga, and we can talk about the various fantastic guest stars.
Yes, because while there are serialized elements that they designed here, this is very much an episodic show. And so, yeah, let's go this episode by episode and kind of see how this breaks down.
So, the first episode, A Fierce Battle, The Shadow Games, is based on Chapter 1 of the manga. It follows the chapter pretty closely with the addition of Miho, changes to Honda's character, and the sequence of events with Ushio, the bully, and the gang is changed at the end to be simplified a little because it's a long chapter. And the game he plays with Yugi is very different. In the manga, it's about stabbing through a pile of money, which is cool, although a little less cinematic. The anime does this thing where they're on the roof and they've got these cards and like Yugi is doing their like a pulley system on either side. It's less thematically resonant because the whole thing is about greed, but it is, I will say, visually pretty cool for the episode. And as Ushio, our guest star, is Otomo Ryuzaburo, who is Crocodile in One Piece, probably the thing he would be best known for, and he is Black Doom in Shadow the Hedgehog in Japanese, including the recent Shadow Generations. Yeah. So great voice actor, and enjoyed him as our initial big bad Ushio, who Yugi fucks with.
Yeah, this one is just because the opening chapter for Yu-Gi-Oh! Is a longer chapter, as is kind of like typical for this thing, so it gives them a lot of material to adapt. Because that will be a thing with some of these we'll talk about, is for the one-off chapters, and we'll talk about this episode too, the one-off chapters do not give enough material for a 24-minute episode of anime, so there's like a couple different strategies, some of them very successful, some of them less successful, that the show uses to fill that time. This first one, is a very straightforward adaptation. I did miss not having the knife game. Like, you're probably right that the thing they do with the roof is a bit more cinematic. But there's something about the resonance of the, like, it's all about money. This dude is just shaking people down for money at the school. And so it's the greed of, like, how much money can you get on your knife point while also not stabbing your own hand. And that, like, he cannot, the shadow game plays on your psychology, so he can't resist, and he's about to stab through his own hand, and so instead he's like, but this is something you didn't think of, Yugi. Why don't I just stab you? And he's like, oh, well, the doors of shadow have opened, and the guy loses his mind. And it's like, I do like the manga version of the game quite a bit more, but overall it's a really good straightforward adaptation that it gets you all of your main characters. You get some good Yami Yugi shit where, he comes in for the first time. It's just a solid first episode.
I agree with all of that. I think one weird bit is that they obviously Honda's characterization has changed throughout this show, but part of that means he's not bullying Yugi with Jinochi, but Ushio does beat up both Jinochi and Honda because they were bullying Yugi. That's a detail from the manga that just doesn't make sense. Like, Honda shouldn't be in that scene. It's Jinochi is the bully in this one. So that I did kind of raise an eyebrow at, like, you guys forgot to fix that little bit of the story, but it's not a huge deal. Yeah. All right, episode 2, The Evil Gamer's Hellish Trap, adapts chapter 4 of the manga, Jailbreak, where we have a criminal break out of jail and then go to the place where Anzu works and make her his hostage, and then Yugi winds up lighting him on fire, as he likes to do in that first volume of the manga. And this is an interesting one because that is just a, simple 20-page story, and so the anime has to expand it quite a bit, and I actually like the way it does it a lot. So for one, it takes the thief Tetsuo and shows him doing all these police heists and constantly failing, including stealing a fake Marie Antoinette necklace, which is funny. It extends the mystery of what Anzu is doing after school to happen over several days, and then includes Miho and Honda all going to work at Burger World with her, which does lead to a funny moment where Jinochi assumes Honda is also doing compensated dating, which is what they think Anzu is doing, which is basically like, teenage, not prostitution, but like sugar daddy stuff. It adds a detective character who is looking for Tetsuo, and a plot point where Tetsuo is a master of disguise, although I don't think he's that good at it. It's very funny. There's this whole scene where the gang winds up helping in the search instead of just being menaced by the criminal, which makes Anzu a little bit more active in the plot. She comes up with the idea that lures Tetsuo out, but then the twist is that the criminal isn't Tetsuo, it's Anzu's boss, Jiro the Spider, and neither of the criminal characters are really based on the manga criminal's design, so they kind of split that part in two. And then they do have a little kiss-off thing at the end where Honda and Miho get a different job with cow-themed uniforms at the end, and it's very funny. The game is basically the same as the manga, which is where Yugi has them each use one finger, and he uses his to light a lighter and then leave it on the guy's hand. It's very cool. I do wish they had kept the actual ending, because in the anime they just make him imagine he's on fire instead of actually immolating him to death, which is a little less badass.
Yes, although like many of the other deaths, nobody seems to have noticed or cared that they've just witnessed the horrible immolation of a human being. Yeah, this is one where I actually am kind of mixed on this episode, in that I like the additions of what they do with the Burger World stuff. I think that sequence of like the characters going to see, like, following Anzu and then getting trapped by her and like coerced into working at Burger World progressively is very funny, leading to Yugi and Jinochi. And you have like all of them come out in their ridiculous pose to say like, "Irashaimase." Like, that's like a fun little bit. That almost feels like a fucking Yakuza side quest.
Yes, it does.
That plays out. The part of the episode that for me doesn't work as well as what they do with like the criminal stuff, which I think just really overcomplicates the story in a way that I was just sort of like a little bit perplexed by. The like, we're giving all this additional stuff with this criminal, but then like there are two criminals who have broken out and one of them's doing the crimes, and then the other one is like following after those crimes but can't do the crimes because the crimes have been done, but he thinks that he did the crime. It's just like, it's a lot of extra weird material that feels mostly like it doesn't add a whole lot to the episode. It feels like it's one of the ones where like there's not much there in the manga chapter because it's just a single chapter. Like, it works fine for what it is, but there's not enough material to make a 24-minute episode out of, so you've got to find something to expand it. And this feels like it's sort of just stuffing it with more things to have happened. Rather than, we'll get to some later episodes that have to fill out those single chapters, but find ways to do it that add more resonance to the story. This just feels like a lot of additional steps occur in order to just get to the same conclusion, and I don't feel like that conclusion is affected by the additional steps, other than it's a little bit more confusing about who is who and is doing what, and what is bad and who is evil, and like what's going on here.
I think that's fair. I enjoyed some of it for the like silliness of it, and that I was just kind of surprised seeing how much it changed this chapter that I've read like a dozen times. But yeah, that's probably true. Our guest stars in this one are Hiyama Nobuyuki as the escaped criminal. You might know him as Hiei in Yu Yu Hakusho. And we've got Umezu Hideyuki as the detective, who appears also later in the Bomber episode. And you might know him. He debuted as Nelmar-sen in Gundam Double Zeta. He was Barry the Chopper in Full Metal Alchemist Brotherhood, and he is Diamante in One Piece.
Yeah, I'm the only one of those. I do not remember, unfortunately, Nelmar-sen off the top of my head in Gundam Double Zeta.
That's okay. But there you go. All right, episode 3 is Clash, the Strongest Monster. This is our introduction to Kaiba. It is based on chapters 9 and 10. It's a two-parter story in the manga. This one adds a scene with Kaiba and his goons beating up school kids for playing cards at the beginning of the episode, which is, I believe Kaiba would do that. Again, obviously introducing the term dual monsters, although one thing they've done is they've redesigned the card backs to have an M and a W on them in homage to the manga name of Magic and Wizards. That is not the card back in the manga. Yugi specifies dual monsters as coming out when he was in the 3rd grade and only getting popular with high schoolers recently, where it's apparently a brand new game in the manga. It adds the field conditions from Duelist Kingdom, which would have begun in the manga by now in serialization. You've got a bunch of other just little details with Honda and Miho and everybody so that they can be part of the plot. You have Kaiba introduced as a transfer student instead of part of Yugi's class. And it makes more sense than the manga, frankly, because they're using his Kaiba Corp characterization so that he is infiltrating the class. There's a scene where they all go to Kaiba's manor together. The weirdest change is that in this one, even though they write out Blue Eyes White Dragon on the card, and even though in later episodes they will say Blue Eyes White Dragon, they only call him the Blue Eyes Dragon in this episode. And in the movie, they do this also with Red Eyes Black Dragon. And I don't get it. Why do they do that, Sean?
It's very confusing. I was with you where I just kept on looking because you can see the card very clearly, so clearly that you don't just see the kanji, which it says like Seigan no Hakuryu, but above it you see in katakana the reading in English of Blue Eyes White Dragon. So you're like, why do they just keep on calling it the Blue Eyes Dragon? But yeah, as you say, after this episode, they then correctly call it Blue Eyes White Dragon, and then you get to the weird movie, and the Red Eyes Black Dragon comes up, and they're just like, oh, it's the Red Eyes Dragon. I'm like, no. I mean, yes, but no, it's the Red Eyes Black Dragon. It's sort of a whole thing, you know? It's weird.
Yeah. It's weird. The B part of the episode with the duel follows the manga beat for beat, just with the addition of the field rules, until the very end, where you have Kaiba's gremlins split the earth, and it results in a draw where Kaiba disappears in a cloud of smoke in a very bizarre, silly ending. And I guess it's set up to sort of have Kaiba be a series-long villain. I do think it's weird, though, because we'll talk about this more with Death T, but the whole Death T thing is that he's getting revenge on Yugi for making him experience death. And that's why he has this death-themed games for Yugi to play, but that doesn't happen to him in the anime. So Kaiba's only motivation in the anime is that Yugi tied him in a card game, which makes Kaiba's, actions later on seem much more psychotic. Is not a huge deal, but I do think it's funny.
Yeah, I mean, they basically just want to position him as your, big bad who has... I mean, it's basically the structure of a season of Sailor Moon, where you've got, here's my big bad guy, and they're trying to do evil shit. In this case, evil shit is, threatening kids and getting cards from your card game, rather than just trying to take over the world. Because he doesn't need to, because he already is the CEO of a giant company. He's already taken over the world. But then he has the Shitenno, or what they call in the fan subs that we have, the Game Masters, which are his 4 lackeys that each are going to challenge Yugi. So it just feels like they want to set that up for the structure of the season, which makes sense. But as you say, the whole point of Kaiba's reappearance is that the implication is he has kind of lost his fucking mind because of what Yami Yugi did to him, which he has experienced a simulated death through hallucination, which understandably would send someone kind of off the deep end, and that's why he's used his company's massive fortune to build a giant death theme park, because that's what Death T stands for, is death theme park, for the entire purpose of fucking with one high school aged kid.
Yes.
That makes a little bit more sense in the manga, where he's lost his complete fucking marbles. Here, he's more just like your Saturday morning cartoon villain, but it makes sense for me for the purposes of what the show is trying to do, to string together a lot of things that, was a bunch of disparate stories in the manga that it wants to make a single season of a TV show out of.
Yeah, it's not a problem. It's just kind of funny when you get to the Death T stuff. But yeah, I mean, there's other changes that happen along the way too. But anyway, I do think this episode is a good, solid adaptation of that original Duel Monsters story, and I enjoyed watching it. And I enjoyed hearing Midorikawa again play this, because this is where Kaiba is trying to be normal still.
Yes.
He hasn't come out of the closet as the big villain of the season. So he's trying to ingratiate himself. And it's because Midorikawa can do that. He can sound very normal. Tsuda Kenjiro cannot sound like a normal person. I'm sorry. He just has resting villain voice or something like that, or at least resting, great samurai voice, however you want to say it, because he's done different kinds of things. But yeah, you can't really have him be your normal high schooler, and Midorikawa can do that. So that's fun.
Yeah, because in this episode, you have the whole sequence where he's just trying to, he tries to swap out the Blue Eyes White Dragon card with a photocopy he's made, which is not a very Kaiba move, that's so petty for Kaiba, in how you conceptualize the character later. So you say the ways in which he's trying to do things are a little bit more subtle and grounded here than the Kaiba One note I want to make, just because this is someone we've talked about before, is the writer for this episode. This is the first episode written by Kobayashi Yasuko, who is one of the main writers for this show, and this is one that wrote the movie at the end of this as well. We have talked about her before, because she goes on later to be the main writer for the 2019 Dororo.
Oh, cool. Yeah.
Yes, so I just want
I know I
wanted
meant
shout
to, yes, I meant to note that after we did the Dororo episode, and I forgot, so thank you, yes. She writes the second most episodes after Inoue, the series composer, and then she does go on to do the movie as well. So that's cool. All right, episode 4 is Stolen, the legendary super rare watch. This is an anime original story. So, like, again, not based on any specific chapter. It's a story about Honda getting basically bamboozled by Miho to go stand in line and wait for a watch, which Yugi helps him out with. And then it turns out there's a schemer and all this stuff happens with it. This episode does notably introduce an opening narration, kind of introducing the premise of Yu-Gi-Oh! That doesn't stick around long. But what I think is funny is that it is almost identical to the one used in Yu-Gi-Oh! Duel Monsters. It's a little longer and it ends in an explanation of the title, that Yu-Gi-Oh! Means King of Games, literally. But I did find it just funny that I'm like, oh, this is just the opening narration from Yu-Gi-Oh! Duel Monsters done here, where it kind of has less to do with everything, but it's kind of funny.
Yes, and this has, you noted this in your notes, but this is the thing I mostly remember from this episode, is it's got a sick ending where you've got this whole game where you have like the pendulum swings by and have to grab the whatever it is, and that's very cool. But then after the guy loses the game, this is the one where I was like, because this is such a good idea that it sounds like it could have been from the manga, but I didn't remember the chapters. I had to go check, as you here, it is an anime original story. But the whole thing of where he sees the fucking, like, he like rips off part of his hand or his arm or whatever, and he sees gears underneath, and then watches start like growing out of his skin, and it's really grotesque, and it's a great ending, and it's the kind of thing that feels like I can envision a panel from the manga with those shots. It's just so in that style of the pseudo horror aesthetic early Yu-Gi-Oh! Has. So it's a pretty impressive episode for me in that regard. Like, I don't think it's like an amazing episode, but it just replicates the feel of that manga in the early chapters so well that it feels like it could have been one of those chapters that you just forgot about.
There is a chapter in the manga, it's the first one in volume 2, where Jinochi is trying to buy these new, like, limited edition sneakers. Right. And I do feel like this one is vaguely inspired by that, because it's also about, like, a limited edition item that someone is selling and then ripping people off with. Every other detail is different. That one involves a game at the end where they have to, like, try to stab a scorpion, and the guy does it wrong and then gets stabbed to death by a scorpion, and Yugi poisons him. It's crazy. This one is different, but I enjoy it. And it's also the first of our sort of Honda Miho stories that we get several of over the course of this series, which is Miho getting Honda into some kind of trouble. Our guest star in this one is Shimada Bean as watch collector Shotaro. We've talked about him many, many, many times. I think he's just so good in so many things. It's weird to say that the person you might know him best as is Broly from Dragon Ball, the character who doesn't talk much. That is probably his most famous part, but he's a great actor. We've talked about him many times on this show. All right.
Absolutely.
Then we've got episodes 5 and 6, which are the two-parter with Shadi. These are based on chapters 13 through 20. What's interesting is that the first episode just does chapters 13 and 14, which is a two-parter called The Man from Egypt, and it is by far the most direct adaptation that the show has done so far. Other than adding Miho, it is beat for beat the manga, and this episode just introduces Shadi to the gang and kind of what his whole deal is. And then in the manga, chapters 15 through 20 is this arc where Shadi basically challenges Yugi and all of his friends to try to like test Yugi's soul. So that first episode is like very well paced in just doing, and I think it's actually one of the best directed episodes of the show too, where it just does that initial story. The second episode sort of compresses that whole arc into one episode. It moves the action from the middle of the school, into the middle of the school day instead of at night. It removes the characters Yoshimori and Grandpa from the fight. It has Honda get possessed in the anime, taking the place of this side character Yoshimori, and it has fewer games that Shadi and Yugi play. But overall, I like both of these a lot, and I think the main reason is, one, I do think they're like, this series has, I think, fairly like standard direction most of the time, but I think these two are really well directed and storyboarded. They're both written by the series composer Inoue Toshiki, and we've got a guest star in Shiozawa Kanato as Shadi, who is tremendous. We've talked about him many times before. He was the original Makuve in Gundam. He played Goemon Ishikawa in Lupin III, The Fuma Conspiracy, and Namu in the original Dragon Ball. We would have mentioned him on Dragon Ball GT because he played the Ice Dragon or San Shinron in that. And he did die tragically young pretty shortly after this Yu-Gi-Oh! Show. And he is fucking phenomenal as Shadi. Like, he sounds a little alien, but also sort sort of weirdly trustworthy, very hard to describe. I just love the way he does it. And every time we bring this actor up, it's always to go like, my God, this guy is great. And it always makes me so sad that he died so young.
Yeah, I mean, he's just one of those very legendary seiyuu from like the late 70s through the 80s. Like, his most famous role is definitely Rei in Fist of the North Star, which is one of the main characters from that series. That's where he has his incredibly iconic line that is referenced in lots of places. It's referenced in Nichijou, which I was rewatching some of that recently, but it's Tomato no Chiwa Nani Urara! It's like, what color is your blood? And he fucks up all these bandits, and it's great. Yeah, he's just an incredible actor. It's a great guest performance here as Shadi, who's obviously a very memorable and important character in the wider scope of Yu-Gi-Oh! With all the Egypt stuff that this show doesn't really get into specifically. But yeah, these are great, particularly that first one, because that's the episode that has him going into Yugi's subconscious and all that shit. Which is just, that's where I feel like you get some of the best early stuff in the show of Ogata Megumi, giving that Yami Yugi performance, because it's such a different scenario than you usually get, of like opening up the door and he's sitting there on his fucking throne, this just like pompous little piece of shit. It's like, how dare you step into my heart, like, let's play a game, come on, man. And it's one of the things that's fun about Shadi is just he is the first character in the story that is from the same kind of world as Yami Yugi. And so you can kind of talk to him on the same terms about the shadow games and all that kind of stuff. But also he's like freaked the fuck out about the notion of this little kid having two souls and what this like other entity is. And it's a great character and a great story that adds so much mystique to the world of Yu-Gi-Oh! That is where it starts transitioning from the one-off stories into this kind of bigger thing. And it's kind of like appropriately, positioned early in both the manga and here to kind of give you that, okay, you've had your taste of your one-off stories. Now you get the sense of the larger mystique of what is going on here. It's very, very good. I think the second of these episodes is also good, but I think you just mentioned here in your notes, like, it's a little bit stuffed, because there's a lot of material that they're having to do. But it still has lots of good material. You've got all the stuff with the fake Jonochi, that they're throwing the Millennium Puzzle and having to walk towards the cliff's edge. And Yugi refuses to throw it because he believes in his friendship. This is the first time you get your kind of heart of the cards-esque friendship is the thing that saves the day in Yu-Gi-Oh! But it works really well, partially because you have Morikawa's performance as evil Jonochi just like bites so hard in this show. Like, it's
full
so
Sephiroth.
effective.
It's like, one of those scenes like where Sephiroth is fucking with Cloud in Final Fantasy VII. It's great.
Yeah, and it just adds a lot of like gravitas to that moment of it makes sense why little Yugi is just devastated to hear his buddy sound like that. But then, his strength of heart to believe in his friends, and that's what's going to save the day.
Yeah, overall, I think these two episodes in a vacuum are good to, sometimes in that first episode, great adaptations of the manga. My one problem is I think this is sequenced wrong. Like, I think there needed to be more stories about the gang and, like, the way Yugi kind of redeems them before you get here. Because at this point in the manga, this is all the way in Volume 3, and Yugi has already had to, like, help Jonochi face his old gang. Everybody has learned more about each other. Anzu has had some of her attraction to Dark Yugi already. And so this arc is sort of a culmination point. And I just think it comes too early in the anime where, like, I think we should have at least have had the episode with Jonochi and his old gang, because the idea of, like, how tight these characters are and loyal, this is where it's, like, tested for the first time. And it feels too early in the anime to do that.
Sure. I think like the part of it is like the feel in the anime is also so different though, because you have this kind of like Scooby Gang quality to the main cast that's just not really there in the manga. So I think I basically agree with you, but I don't think it really bothered me so much in the moment, partially because the way the main cast is used here is just fundamentally different than it is in the manga. So I don't know if even if they had sequenced it differently, I don't know if it would have given that effect regardless, because of the way that the structure of the show is fundamentally different than the structure of the manga.
One other guest character we didn't mention is Professor Kanakura, who we see is like the bad guy who's like dug up all these ancient Egyptian artifacts. Is voiced by Aomori Shin, who we've mentioned many times. Another just, again, everybody is overqualified for their parts. This is a crazy cast. Episode 7 is the Underhanded Digital Pet Rebellion, which is based on Chapter 21, Digital Pet Duel. This one hits a couple of the same beats as the chapter, but mostly goes its own way. The manga chapter is actually one of the rare instances where Dark Yugi never comes out, and Yugi beats the bully up all on his own. What this one does is it expands and alters the story by fleshing out the Kujirada character. It adds the whole Miho and Honda side of the story, and the whole contest about using the digital pets to go to Australia, and then it adds the character Hayama, who has been bullied by Kujirada. And then it goes absolutely fucking bonkers, and it has it turn out that Kujirada is Hayama's pet in like a BDSM way, and he kidnaps Miho in a warehouse where he also whips Kujirada, like literally has a fucking whip, and he tries to turn Honda in his new pet. Like I said, it's fucking bonkers. Dark Yugi does come out, and the climax is similar to the chapter, except that the digital pets fight in the real world because of Yugi's shadow game, and then Hayama gets eaten alive, and that's great. You've got Sakaguchi Daisuke playing that character of Hamada Hayama. This would be a fairly early role for Sakaguchi, but like a very good one. We've obviously talked about him many times. He rocks, and he gets to play a pretty delicious villain performance here. And yeah, bizarre fucking episode, but I like it.
I like this episode a lot. Like, this is one where it's like, it feels like it's mostly just based on the seed of the story from the manga, but it's like, it's a very different episode. And I like the manga story a lot, but the manga story I think is most fun just for the art, like the way that Takahashi draws, like inside the Tamagotchi game, and you have a little monster, and like you're looking through the top window from their perspective. It's just a very creative way he like draws the world of the Tamagotchis from within the machine. Is super cool. And they don't really go for that here. Instead, they've sort of turned it into a more full-featured story. But I think they do, and this is one of the Kobayashi Yasuko episodes, like she does a good job of like getting this sense of the thematic coherence of the pet idea. And it's a little bit goes over the top with, as you say, there's like a weird BDSM vibe to it of like using that pet language for people. But the sense of like, it's about this rich kid using money and influence to try to turn people into his playthings, in the way that we buy a little toy game to have a little fake pet that does whatever we want it to do, because that's the appeal of the digital pet, is it doesn't have any of the like messiness of a real world life creature, like, you know, flesh and blood actual like animal. That's a much more complicated thing to deal with, and that feels like Hayam is like wants that, but, you know, to 11, and he's just going to use money to get it out of like people and kind of tame them. It's a good, really fucked up idea. And I do think having Sakaguchi Daisuke just really pushes it over the top in a way that I love, because we talked about him with Welcome to the N.H.K. It's like he is like the best buddy character. I think he would have already been that in a couple of like more minor roles at this point. Let's be post Victory Gundam for sure. And there's something about, you know, Hayama just seems like your sort of standard Sakaguchi Daisuke little nerd friend character who's getting bullied. And then it turns out that he's just an absolute fucking psychopathic monster. And that's a great turn. If you're a Sakaguchi Daisuke fan, it's a very fun performance, because, you know, he would not have been as typecast at this point, but especially when you know the way in which he's typecast, it makes the performance like extra fun. I think this is just like a very solid episode that's using the seed of the manga story to tell its own big kind of crazy anime full-featured story, but is keeping it in line of the sensibilities of Yu-Gi-Oh! And having like a good thematic resonance to how the game plays into things. Because that's the thing I look for the most, is like how well does the game dynamic thematically resonate with the main plot of the episode, I think is like a really important thing for the formula of early Yu-Gi-Oh! And this does a great job of bringing that to a story that didn't necessarily have it in the manga.
Yeah, I think that's true. And the manga chapter is just a little one-off where it all happens in the classroom, like at lunch, and it's just a sweet little chapter. There is a moment that I would love to see animated. It wouldn't have made sense in this story, but at the end of the chapter, Yugi's digital pet has won, but as a result of winning, it's going to die the next day, like the digital pet is going to expire. So Yugi, at night, he's in, you know, his little loft in the game store, and he's just sitting at like by the light of like his little lamp watching his digital pet and says, "Don't worry, I'll stay with you until morning." That's a lovely little moment that like I think is the kind of the point of that chapter. Wouldn't have made sense in this version of the story, but you know, I would love to like hear Ogata Megumi do that scene because it's very fun. But this is great. This is a good episode. Episode 8 is The Four Game Masters Finally Move Out. And this is an anime original story that extends the Kaiba arc and later the Death Tea arc by having the first of our game masters. In this case, it is Count Ridley Sheldon, voiced by Otsuka Chikao, who is, the original Goemon, Dr. Eggman, Gold Roger, Xehanort, Tao Pai Pai, and the father of Otsuka Akio, an absolute fucking giant. And he's very good here as a old, gentleman who plays card games and duels Yugi. And I don't think it's a great episode. I do enjoy Otsuka Chikao. I enjoy how fucking weird Kaiba is. There's this one part where he goes, "I'll make you kneel before me in the mansion of dolls, Yugi." And I wrote, okay, Kaiba, keep it in your pants, because the whole thing here is that Count Ridley Sheldon uses dolls, and it's very weird. Honestly, the thing about this episode that bothered me most is that there's this weird depiction of little Yugi as very inept at duel monsters without Dark Yugi, which is never how he's characterized. Like, Dark Yugi is better at games, but little Yugi is typically better at most games than those around him. Like, he can hold his own, and later on is very good. So I thought that characterization was weird. But overall, this one is fun more for how kind of bizarre it is than anything intrinsic it's doing, but it's good.
Yeah, like, I think in general, outside of the third Game Master one, which I like quite a bit, I think the four Game Masters are not particularly great episodes. I do like this English translation of the title, though, The Four Game Masters Finally Move Out, because that just sounds like it's Kaiba is just fed up with these people living off his fucking mansion. It's like, they finally moved out. They got their own fucking place. Jesus Christ. Got to get these fucking Game Masters out of here. But yeah, there's like one thing that's very weird, you did mention your notes that I like, is there's this whole thing where like Yugi is called to the nurse's office and there's a sexy nurse there that he plays duel monsters with, and then you find out that the sexy nurse is just a puppet from the Otsuka Chikao character, and you're meant to believe that Count Ridley Sheldon is somehow like ventriloquizing this like super sexy old lady voice or like older woman voice. Yes. This doll, and then Yugi gets in the fucking limo or whatever, and he hears the sexy nurse voice, and then the old dude turns around in the passenger seat, and it's just a really weird moment. One thing that also makes me crack up about this is I have this YouTube channel, Washiagana. It's a Japanese YouTube channel I love that has Nakamura Yuichi, the voice actor, on it. And just the other day, they did an episode where they were talking about some Dragon Ball stuff, and Nakamura Yuichi was talking about Tao Pai Pai, and he was like, he was saying, it's like, I wonder if they regretted using up Otsuka Chikao on a character that ended up not being in Dragon Ball too much, because he's like, Tao Pai Pai gets killed off relatively quickly. And it's like, Otsuka Chikao's like the guy. He was such a huge voice actor. It's like, that obviously when they would have cast him, they wouldn't have known how quickly Tao Pai Pai gets taken out. And it's funny to think about that comment relative to Count Ridley Sheldon.
Yes.
Like, this is not quite a Tao Pai Pai tier character, but Otsuka Chikao does a very good job.
Honestly, the more we talk about it and I remember all the fucking bizarre things in this episode, the more I kind of want to go rewatch it, because it's hilarious. And honestly, having a second half where you've got, Ogata Megumi in her deep, dark Yugi voice going opposite Otsuka Chikao, you can't go wrong with that. That's fun.
I think this episode is a good example of kind of, for me, my overall take on this show, which is like, if I were to rate this episode objectively on a scale of 0 to 10, I don't think it rates very high. I don't think it's a great episode. I don't think the animation is, or the direction or any of that stuff is very good. I don't think the plot is very good. I don't think the Duel Monsters game they play is particularly dramatic or compelling. And yet there is something incredibly charming and endearing about it to me. And so it's that kind of thing where it's I don't care how you rate it on an objective scale of is it actually a very good episode of anime? No, not really. Compare it to episodes of contemporary shows like a Sailor Moon, and it's nowhere near as good as your average episode of Sailor Moon by any metric. And yet I do have a huge amount of fondness for this really ridiculous episode with the old man and his sexy nurse doll that he fucking has his sexy lady voice with. It's great.
It's very funny. Let's move on to one that I genuinely think is a great episode, and that's episode 9, Explosion, the Ultimate Secret Yo-Yo Technique. And this one's fascinating because adaptationally what it does is it takes two separate two-parters from the manga, chapters 11 and 12, The Wild Gang, and chapters 48 to 49, Jinochi's Soul Battle. Both of those are stories that involve the Rintama High Gang, which is Jinochi's old gang from when he was, just a fucking punk in middle school. And the anime combines those yo-yos into one story. It mainly follows the plot of the Wild Gang, the earlier story, which is where Jinochi is pressured to join the gang again and abandon his friends. But it adds the yo-yo elements from the second, which is where the gang comes back, but this time they use yo-yos to hurt people because Yu-Gi-Oh! Is a weird fucking series. The story sort of basically follows, again, that first chapter for the A part, and then for the B part, the climax plays out mainly as an adaptation of the second story, with the yo-yo battles, having Jinochi have a big fight with Hirutani, the boss of the other gang, and then Yugi takes on the rest of the bullies out on the roof. And honestly, I just think it's a very smart piece of adaptation. I think these stories probably work even better combined this way than they do separately. And you get to hear Ogata Megumi do the greatest kiss-off line in all of Yu-Gi-Oh! You never aim yo-yos at people, you aim them at the ground, and then they all fall through the ground to their presumed death because he has gone around and made a bunch of holes in the ground with his yo-yo. I fucking love this episode.
Yes, yeah, that moment at the end with, as I say, Ogata getting the, like, yo-yo wa hito ni mukeru mono de wa nai. Jimen ni mukeru mono da. And then they all fall through. It's fucking great. Yes. Yeah. Yeah, this is, I just say this is like a very cool, very smart piece of adaptation. That, again, like, I think either one of those stories on their own, you would have had to add quite a bit to, like, if you just wanted to do the Wild Gang story, you'd have to flesh it out because it's only 2 chapters. It's not quite beefy enough to be a whole episode on its own. Same thing with the Jinochi Soul Battle one, with the yo-yos. But I also think, like, with one 27-episode anime, I don't think you want to do 2 different old high school Jinochi buddy stories. So I think it's just, like, a very smart choice to say, let's combine these into one. It's pretty seamless. And this is also, I think, the episode that most clearly finds a place for Honda in the story of their new version of Honda, right? Because, originally Honda is just another punk like Jinochi. Here, they have this whole, like, new backstory of, like, they went to the same middle school together, so Honda is aware of these old guys that Jinochi used to pal around with. But it also tells the story of how this version of Honda and Jinochi became friends, which was through this whole relay race, and he's got the fucking sash they won with or whatever to use as, like, the emblem of their friendship, which is very Yu-Gi-Oh!, even if it isn't actually from the manga. And I thought this, like, it's the most I've ever felt like their new version of Honda really fit into the world of Yu-Gi-Oh! In a way that made sense to me, because they cut down on some of, like, the comic relief elements of the character. And I wish that they had found more ways to do that in other stories than this, to, like, give a bigger sense of full-fleshed, like, history and characterization to their version of Honda, just because you can't, like, map on the same character from the manga because they're so different. And I really liked what this episode did with that.
I agree. I think, like, it kind of reveals that his whole beautification shtick is a way of running from his past, and that's part of why Jinochi is kind of annoyed by him. And I think they could have followed up on that and done more. But in this episode, it works very well. I do think this is, like, one of the very best episodes of this show. And if you were to rate this, like, qualitatively, just genuinely, this is a good one. You don't have to make excuses for it.
Yes.
Then we've got episode 10, another these next couple ones are fascinating adaptations. And that's actually part of what's also fun about talking about this show, Sean, is it's so rare we get to talk about an anime that is this kind of out there with how it adapts its manga, especially in the shonen space. Like, shonen manga generally get very straightforward adaptations, I think it's fair to say.
Yeah, and also it's like, it's not doing, like, making big adaptational choices because it's like a Full Metal Alchemist 03 situation where they ran out of stuff. They could have done a much more conventional version of it, but I think they realized that, like, a lot of those early chapters just don't have enough in them. So you have to be very active with your adaptational choices if you want to pull those stories in. And so, yeah, it's really cool. And I think it was 100% the right choice, because I don't think the show would work that well if you're doing a very flat, straightforward adaptation and putting, like, 2 stories in an episode or something. I don't know how you would do that for the early, like, 2 volumes of Yu-Gi-Oh! But yeah, it's
that kind of thing
cool.
Works with, like, a comedy. It would be hard to do with this kind of show.
Yes.
Yeah. But anyway, episode 10 is The Beautiful Teacher, The Secret Mask. And this is based on chapter 7. But in the manga, there's several things that are interesting here. First off, this is the Miho story from the manga, where she's mostly referred to as Ribbon. Honda is trying to figure out how to confess his feelings for her, and Grandpa Muto sells him the blank puzzle that he writes, like, his love confession on, and then the evil teacher finds this, and there's sort of this, deadline structure of, oh my god, she's putting the puzzle together, and then Dark Yugi curses her. In the show, this is all, like, changed. It's actually very interesting. They have a new student character who is crushing on Jinochi and wants to confess, and she buys the puzzle from Grandpa with advice from basically like Anzu and Yugi. Then you've got Miss Chono, the evil teacher. We have more stuff with her. So like in the manga, it's mentioned that she's having marriage interviews where she turns down men, but we actually see it here. They've also given her a fairly different character design. And then the story diverges after Chono discovers the puzzle, where Anzu decides to take the heat and then starts a whole campaign to get the school rules changed so that they can do stuff like this. And this means that this shifts in the adaptation from a Honda story to an Anzu one, which I think is interesting. But I like it, since I think this show has the strongest characterization of Anzu, as I said, in any version of Yu-Gi-Oh! And it gives us sort of a full ending where there's an actual game between Yugi and Miss Chono, whereas in the ending of the manga, he just sort of curses her from the back of the classroom, which doesn't feel like the way Dark Yugi would do it. He would,
yes.
He'd want to be fucking with the game. So you have that. There's also a reference to Chapter 2, Lying Eyes, where there are several references to Jinochi's love of porno tapes, which that is where that chapter comes from. So that's kind of funny.
Yes.
But yeah,
well,
I like this one a lot.
It's not just Jinochi's love of porno tapes. You're cutting Yugi short there because he also is way into porn. That's one thing that, this show also sort of like reduces the violent content. It also takes all the sexual stuff out because there is a lot of sexual stuff in early Yu-Gi-Oh! Including, like Jinochi talking about like trying to squint his eyes to see past the mosaic that's on Japanese porn by law.
Yes.
And Yugi being like way into that. he gives Yugi a porn. And it's, you don't get that, as much as I'd love Ogata Megami to like be reacting to those scenes. It's one of the ways in which they have sort of made it more child friendly, this show.
Yes, but I like this episode. I think it takes a chapter that is a good chapter in the manga but would not be a full episode of anime and turns it into a full episode that also, again, it shifts the character dynamic completely to make it an Anzu story where she barely features in the manga chapter, but it's a good Anzu story, and I think it works really well.
Yeah, it's actually like the whole plot line of the teacher being like, oh, like, why don't you start a school petition? But then she's like organizing the students or behind the scenes to fight the petition. Like, that is very, very similar to a plotline from the manga / anime Dear Brother, which is a Dezaki Osamu anime, which I watched about a year ago. And it's just got that like Catholic girls school energy, even though this is not a Catholic girls school, but it's got that like where, operating behind the scenes using like, politics at the school and manipulating things. It's just like a good plot device to expand that idea out and give more material to Chono Sensei. And then the game they play at the end fucking kicks ass. This is another one that feels like it could have just been up from the manga. It's such a good idea where Yami Yugi throws like 2 mirrors down and fucking breaks 2 mirrors. And it's like, oh, we got to put them back together like they're puzzle pieces. And as they're putting it together, it's Chono Sensei sees her like horrific reflection, be like the reflection of her soul, which is a substantial improvement over the manga chapter, which I do think that manga chapter is very weird in that like it just doesn't have a good resolution. Like, it feels like it wants to be a 2-part story that has like a game at the end of it, and it's just like sort of Yami Yugi just uses magic or some shit to just curse her, and it just feels like it kind of breaks the rules of the shadow game stuff. But the idea of like we're like picking up shards of glass and having to put together a puzzle because the whole thing was about this puzzle game is very good. I think it's just I think it's a notable improvement over the manga chapter. We'll recognize that the manga chapter is not trying to be anything huge, but this is just such a smart way to adapt it. You also do have a great guest performance for Jono Sensei, which is Katsuki Masako, whom we've talked about a lot, particularly in Gundam. She's Rekoa from Zeta Gundam. She's also Tsunade from Naruto, if you're a Naruto person. And she's obviously just a great voice actress, and she's super good as this just evil fucking teacher who's just using her position to, like enjoy this power and affection from her students and how she can manipulate and control things. It's a great, just like evil fucking performance. So top to bottom, I just think this is a very, very strong episode of the show.
Totally agree. Another guest star in this one is Nakai Kazuya, who would be best known as Zoro, which he would be about to play the following year on One Piece. He appears as one of the male students here. I just think it's always funny when you see someone like that right before they're about to break out. And then you have Sato Masaharu as the vice principal. We'll see him again in episode 22 as a different character. And he's one of those character actors who's been in everything, including a lot of Dragon Ball. He was actually Shenlong at the very end of Z into GT when that part was in flux. And he also debuted on Dragon Ball as one of the Boss Rabbit henchmen in an early episode. And I like Boss Rabbit, so I think that's funny.
Yep. Rest in peace, Boss Rabbit, when fucking Kame Sennin blew your ass up when you got put on the moon. Pour one out.
Pour one out. Episode 11, The Rumored Capmon. It's a new arrival. This is based on Chapter 24, Capsule Monster Chess, but it's another weird adaptation because in the manga, this is the introduction of Mokuba, Kaiba's little brother, who leads a gang of elementary schoolers and challenges Yugi to a game of Capmon in his secret base, which is an abandoned warehouse, as revenge for Seto, who is still in a shadow game coma. Mokuba also says that he will cut Yugi's finger off with a switchblade if Yugi loses. Dark Yugi is very hardcore in return and traps Mokuba inside a capsule at the end. Mokuba also then hints at the upcoming Death Tea arc. It's a weird chapter. In the anime, it is an adaptation of the chapter because the game is the same, but only the game itself, Capmon, and the warehouse setting are kept. Mokuba never appears here, and instead we have a new classmate character, Warashibe, who is introduced, who is a mentally deranged Capmon fiend obsessed with Miho, who ropes Yugi into his schemes to woo her and trap her in a display case in his warehouse. It's a weird episode. Miho gets to be a little more proactive, getting pissed off at Warashibe's bullshit and directly challenging him to Capmon, which is fun. And then the game itself is basically an exact adaptation of the manga chapter, even though the character dynamics are fairly different, and Yugi swaps in for Miho halfway through. And then Warashibe is given Mokuba's punishment of being trapped inside a capsule.
Yeah, this is one where, like, all the stuff with Warashibe and that character and the Miho stuff, this episode feels so much like they took a Sailor Moon episode that didn't get made and the chapter from the manga and just kind of combine them together, where instead of like one of like the random Sailor Moon monsters coming out and like being powered by Warashibe's like jealousy and his like intense, possessive love for Miho, who would either be the best friend character in Sailor Moon or one of the sailors, and that turning into a monster that then Sailor Moon has to show up and fight. Here, it's they have to play Capsule Monster. But it's just like the plot of it, if you haven't seen Sailor Moon, it's hard to describe, but it just so feels like an episode of Sailor Moon. It's kind of wild. Obviously, like, this is so contemporaneous to Sailor Moon. It would be like one of the later series at the same time, but it just has exactly that feel to it. One thing that's great, this is from the manga as well, but this has what is my personal favorite monster in the history of all things Yu-Gi-Oh!, which is the Great Pa, which is a weird little troll guy who has a shield that just has the Japanese katakana Pa with an extended line on it, and that's just it. He's the Great Pa, and he's got a Pa character on a shield, and that's it, and he's just a dude, and it's great. Like, when the Great Pa showed up, I'm like, that's amazing. And I looked it up, and then I was like, I read the manga chapter. He's like, oh, he's in the manga too. It's a Great Pa. I don't know I don't know if that's a reference to something. I have no idea. It's the Great Pa, and he's really great.
It's very funny. Yeah, I like this episode in its all of its sort of weirdness. I think it's a little odd they don't introduce Mokuba earlier, given that they do still do the like whole rematch thing later on. I guess that's fine, but it's a little odd. The Warashibe stuff is a little like, it kind of blends in my memory with the stuff from a few episodes earlier with the digital pet episode, and all of the kind of weird BDSM-y stuff from that is kind of repeated here. But I do like Miho just going off on this guy is pretty fun.
Yes, yeah, Miho is just great in this episode. Like, you kind of just give such a good performance at this.
Yes.
Totally fucking enraged, pissed off Miho, who's not taking any bullshit anymore. I'm way into.
100%. Then you've got episode 12, The Extremely Lucky Enemy, The Invincible Legend. This is a fun one because you have Horikawa Ryo, Vegeta, the Prince of All Saiyans himself, appearing as the second game master, Fuwa Ryuichi, who is this lucky motherfucker. And this episode is sort of loosely based on chapter 42, which is where Jinochi, in a bid to pay off his father's debts, goes on a game show, and the game show is rigged, so Dark Yugi plays a game with the sort of TV producer and unrigs it, it, Jinochi wins, but then the company goes bankrupt and he doesn't get any of the money. This episode sort of takes the game show and some of those elements of what happens, but of course everything else, the Fuwa character, the Kaiba connection, all the Game Master stuff, and the fact that Jinochi isn't that involved in this story, changes all of that stuff. But honestly, this one is just, it's worth it 100% for Horikawa, who is just great here in a very different part than Vegeta, but you can recognize him immediately because nobody else talks like Horikawa, and it is a very fun guest performance as this just shit-eating lucky douchebag, who I guess is actually magic, because we never find out that like he's cheating or anything, but eventually his luck runs out after he plays a shadow game with Yugi.
I don't think this episode is good, other than the fact that it's got Horikawa playing the guest character. I think that is like literally the only saving grace of this episode. That's otherwise a very bad episode. Because it's also because the other part of it is it's not just him; it's him doing a Kansai accent as well, which is very fun to hear. Because it's just you just got to imagine what if like Vegeta got into Manzai or some shit. What would that sound like? But yeah, there's it just feels like it's half a plot of an episode, like the fact that there's no twist on his luck bullshit. It's just like, it just feels like they didn't really try to come up with an episodic plot for this. It's like very bizarre, especially because there are moments where it feels like they're building up to a twist where like, I remember there are some kids who are like, oh my God, it's the guy from TV. And he's like, don't touch me. Don't you dare touch me. And he says like, your bad luck will rub off on me, which I assumed that he had like a device hidden on him or something that if they touched it would expose it or something that he's been using to rig the games. But no, it's just he's magically lucky and that's it. And there's no game to it. There's no like, he's not even doing anything wrong. He's just lucky. I mean, he's kind of a dick, but he's not cheating. He's just legitimately really lucky. You can't blame the dude for luck. Like, that's like, so what? Like, he goes up and they do the little, like, roll the fucking ball to see if you get the, like, trip to Hawaii or whatever. It's like, he didn't cheat to do that. He just legitimately got the trip to Hawaii. How can you blame the guy? He's just the best person in the world. He is extremely lucky and he's the invincible legend. And there's, like, it's not his fault. So there's just something about the episode that feels like it makes no sense and does not come together at all because it never reveals why this guy is actually a bad guy rather than just being kind of mean, but also like he is legitimately super lucky. Like, he's not doing anything wrong.
It's weird.
Justice for Furuta Ryuichi is what I'm saying. It's just justice for the guy. He's not a bad guy.
Well, in the Yu-Gi-Oh! Anime remake we're planning, we'll just build him into the plot as a main character, and, he can, Episode 13, Target the Schoolgirls, The Fangs of Great Prophecies. I think another of the best in this series. It's another Kobayashi Yasuko episode. This one is based on Chapter 5 of the manga. It's the one with the sort of false prophet at the school, and it's a really good adaptation. It is the chapter. The skeleton of the plot is the same, but what it does is it fleshes out the character details and a couple of interactions. It gives us a few extra plot beats, like the thing where Jinochi gets the fortune and then the light falls on him. That is added for the anime. The game with the chloroform is fleshed out a little bit, but overall, I think it's just sort of the chapter, but better, frankly. It's a really good story for Anzu and for Yugi. They do this, one really smart change is that little Yugi becomes more proactive in the plot because he's jealous of Anzu's mysterious sort of like crush on this other guy, which is Dark Yugi. He's pushing back on the psychic. There's a scene where in the anime, Yugi pushes back on the psychic, and then the psychic does the whole countless words prophecy, which then threatens him in the library where he pushes over all the bookshelves. In the manga, it's just Yugi sort of like very casually, timidly admitting a disinterest in fortune telling. And I like that they make Yugi more proactive. It gives Ogata room to like put some real pathos in the performance. She really sells this moment afterwards where Yugi feels guilty because he's wondering if he should have called out the psychic character. And then at the very end, Dark Yugi does this great thing where he has to catch the chloroform and he tosses the fucking Millennium Puzzle to do it, and it's sick as shit. So yeah, this episode rocks. It also has Chiba Shigeru as Kokurano, the fortune teller. But if you look at Kokurano's character design, which is a weird little guy, and you would think that Chiba would do his weird little guy voice, which would be basically his Emperor Pilaf voice or his Garlic Jr. voice. But no, even though it's a weird little guy, he does his adult deep villain voice like Raditz, and he does it like he fucking commits to the part, and it's crazy. Chiba Shigeru is such a weirdo, and I love him so much. This is great.
Yes, it's amazing. This does mean that we have had 3 of the 4 main characters from Yu Yu Hakusho in this, because Chiba Shigeru is Kuwabara. You had Hiyama, who plays Hiei earlier, and of course we have Kurama. The only one we don't have nowhere in this show, unfortunately, is the actor who plays Urameshi Yusuke. So we don't get the full 4, but we do have 3 of the main characters of Yu Yu Hakusho now on the show, which is a great little detail. Yeah, this is maybe my favorite episode of this show. Like, I think it's such a good adaptation. Like, I think it's a very just clear improvement on the chapter from the manga. Again, not because the chapter from the manga is bad, it's just a single chapter, so there's only so much it can do as a story. And this is just such a smart adaptation, with the big thing being what you identify here with Yugi's proactiveness just gives that character so much dynamism in the plot. I love the ways in which he's like, he's so confident that the prophecy shit is all bullshit. Like, he calls it out immediately, which is in the manga, but it's much more forceful here. But he calls it out internally. And then he's struggling with, like, do I try to discredit this fortune teller in front of everybody, or do I not? And there's a whole thing with, like, Anzu and her crush on the mysterious dude from the whole, like, robbery incident. Like, that stuff is just played so well. And then the game, I think, is also like a notable substantial improvement, because in the manga it's this whole thing of they have the chloroform bottles on this table on top of all these sheets of paper, and they have to rip the sheets of paper off, and if you fuck up, the chloroform will fall off and then knock you out because it's chloroform. And the whole twist to that is that the Yamayugi gets to a place where if Coconut opposed the paper, no matter what, it's going to fall. And he taunts him to say, oh, don't you have psychic powers? Can't you do something? And Kokonada hallucinates that he's able to make it float in the air, which is fine, but it doesn't resonate strongly with the plot, because he's never claimed to have psychokinesis. He claims to be able to see the future. And so instead, the game in the anime is he's tied up the chloroform bottles and they to this like clock, and as the second hand passes the rope, it will cut the rope. And so, but you can't tell which one of the 4 ropes is going to get cut because they're all tangled together. So it's about, like, can you predict and anticipate which chloroform bottle is going to go? And that's a much smarter way to play off of the notion that this is a guy pretending to be able to see the future, but is actually full of bullshit. I just think, like, it's such a smart way to take the same kernel of the game, but it's so much more resonant to what's going on in the story. I just think it's fucking great. And just the way it's, like, directed, the pacing of it, the writing, the performance, like, it's just such a tightly well-structured episode with really great drama and character writing. It's really good. Like, this was the episode that I watched this, and up to this point I'd been enjoying the show, but I think this was the episode that made me be like, you know what, this show can put out some really great episodes. Like, not every episode is that good. Again, like, the previous episode was kind of bad, but I watched these 2 in the same night. I watched that one, was like, this show sometimes is not great. And I watched this episode, like, but sometimes the show is really great. Like, goddamn, it can put out a fucking great episode, and this is one of them.
I agree completely. And I actually think that about the next one, too.
Yes.
Because episode 14, A Bomb Game Makes for the Worst Date, very literal title there. That's based on chapter 45, which is one of my favorite chapters in the manga. It's so cool to get to see it animated. This is the one where Anzu takes Yugi on a date to the amusement park, but has sort of this extra motivation of trying to see if she can get Dark Yugi to come out and jump into action. So that's what happens. It makes one big change, which is that the game that Yugi plays with the Bomberman is changed from a solitaire game to this thing with sort of balloons and colors and a clock. And that initially disappointed me until I realized what they were doing with it, because it makes it way more cinematic. There's this whole sequence at the end where Yugi does this mad dash to get to this like Tower of Terror thing to be drawn up in the amusement park so he can see over to the flower clock that the Bomberman is reading things from. And so it becomes very like cinematic and active. And then you still get the main pleasure of the chapter, which is watching Yugi publicly jump into action and take control of an active terror investigation. Good stuff. I just love how Yugi just takes over from the detective and is like, I'll take it from here, officer. I'm going to beat the terrorist. It's fucking great.
Yes, it's basically what if Yugi was John McClane in Die Hard 3. It's like the plot of this, and it's so good. As I say, this is like one of the great chapters in this era of the manga. It's so good, it's so memorable, and it's an awesome adaptation. Yeah, and like you, I love the moment of Yugi like dashing over to the Tower of Terror or whatever and getting shuttled up to the top so he can look down and he figures the whole thing out. And it's just,
Yeah, sorry. There's this moment in there where he's won the game and he saved Anzu, but he wants to like reveal who the bomber is. So he tricks the bomber into thinking there's a bomb in his car by taking his wristwatch and putting it up to the microphone and like freaks out the bomber. And it's a fucking sick scene. And then at the end, Yugi this is another change from the chapter. He hand delivers the bomber to the cops. He like takes him out and is like, come on over here. And I just love it. Yugi has gone and solved a major terror case and it's not even lunchtime yet. He's our hero. Speaking of amazing things in this episode, as the Bomberman, you have Nakao Ryusei going full-bore Frieza as the bomber. This is the third episode in a row with a major DBZ villain as the guest voice, which makes me think this team had a love for Dragon Ball above and beyond just working at Toei.
Yeah, it is as soon as, because you have a little like vignette at the beginning of the episode that shows the bomber blowing up some other place, and there's this whole thing of like this detective who's on the case, who is the guy from episode 2, who weirdly looks like he could be like Honda's dad. I'm not sure why. And it's a whole thing. And yeah, like it's just as soon as you hear Frieza's voice, you're like, oh, this is going to be a good one. Yeah, it's awesome. I definitely love this episode. And it adds to my sort of our like mental like read other version of Yu-Gi-Oh! Where what if it was like a whole like serial murder drama? Well, what if the thing was also that Yugi then is helping the cops on some cases and it's like fucking Dexter. And it's like they have to figure out like they'd never suspect him because all these like other murderers who theme their murders around games, well, Yugi's the only one who can solve it. He couldn't possibly be the greatest serial killer of them all, could he? Or could he?
Now I'm imagining the live-action Yu-Gi-Oh! Adaptation where Michael C. Hall is Yugi.
just Michael C. Hall, like fucking, strong jaw, rectangle face, like handsome Hollywood man, but he's just got the Yu-Gi-Oh! Hair on.
Yes,
Someone
exactly.
Photoshop that, please.
Okay. Episode 15 is one of the most bizarre in the series, and I think it fucking slaps. This is the one where the witch sisters from Macbeth try to steal a playing card from Yugi. It is absolutely bizarre. It's not one of the Game Masters episodes, right? But it's just but it's like tangentially related, because what this does is it actually anticipates what would eventually become a common Yu-Gi-Oh! Trope of the Millennium Puzzle getting stolen and then little Yugi having to duel to get it back. It's kind of hard to tell because I don't know all the chapter publication dates versus the anime production. The publication dates we have are like for the collected volumes. So it's hard to tell how far they were into Duelist Kingdom when they made this, or if it's all just a coincidence, because you could have had stories like this by now. But in any case, this one also brings forward the whole idea of the card table having holograms in it. You have the later trope of Kaiba betting a trunk full of cards in a duel he's sure he will win. And they finally start saying Blue Eyes Whito Dragon here instead of just Blue Eyes Dragon. But I knew I loved this episode where near the end, Yugi is having his duel and Kaiba comes in quoting Macbeth, taking the stage, being a total just fucking badass. And I wanted to cheer. It totally feels like a Through the Looking Glass version of an episode from the second anime, but just much, much weirder. And it also continues all of the Yugi Anzu romantic intrigue of the last couple episodes. And honestly, this stretch in the middle is maybe my favorite stretch of the show, where it's just Anzu Yugi stories that do a lot of interesting things adaptationally. There's a lot of good stuff in this stretch.
Yes, this is definitely a weird episode, though, yeah, because it starts with the fucking, like, these three, like, girls, like, doing their, like, whole, like, witch routine of, like, the double boil and trouble and all that shit. It's fucking weird, but yeah. And then, right, because then at the end is when Kaiba duels instead, right? And that's how the whole episode resolves. Yeah, it's a very strange episode, but it's very fun.
Because Kaiba comes in, and this is what makes it feel like an episode from the second anime, because what it is Kaiba coming in and saving Yugi for himself, which Kaiba does a bunch in, like, that early era of Yu-Gi-Oh! Where he's like, or he does this all the way up to Battle City, where he'll come in and be like, no, Yugi, you're gonna win this fucking thing because you've got to duel me. Like, that's when Yugi is fighting, like, the mime guy, and Yugi almost gives up, and then Kaiba comes in and is like, where's your duelist honor, Yugi? And it's great. So I loved this. I loved hearing, this is where you start to hear Midori Kawa get to do all of the kinds of lines Tsuda Kenjiro is known for doing. Like, I just noted this is the first time you get to hear Kaiba say, Sore wa do kana? Or the full Blue Eyes Whito Dragon. Like, those are just things that Tsuda Kenjiro has said 7 billion times on the second anime, so it was fun to hear Midori Kawa get to do them. And yeah, I love that it's about just actual witches, I guess. There's 3 of them, they're pretending to be one person, they're tricking Anzu. It's a fun one.
Yes. And it is, you get to finally see, that Kaiba is truly like the greatest tsundere in the history of anime. It's like,
Yes.
all he wants is Yugi's love and friendship, and he just can't admit it to himself.
Episode 16, another of my favorites, and another one written by Kobayashi Yasuko, whose episodes just are generally very good on this show.
Yes.
It's called Turnabout by a Hair's Breadth, The White-Robed Crisis. And this is an anime original story, but introducing the character Shizuka, who is Jinochi's sister. And she is first introduced in the manga in chapter 63, which would be in volume 8. So a little bit beyond where this show sort of officially adapts. One change they make, though, is Shizuka's affliction is changed from some kind of macular degeneration, she's losing her eyesight, to an unspecified illness that just keeps her in the hospital. But this episode fucking rocks. You've got Jinochi getting a love story with this nurse in the hospital. Yugi duels an evil doctor who is obsessed with golf. You've got Yugi and Jinochi doing this playing card-themed manzai comedy bit to cheer up Shizuka that is just fucking delightful. And then there is the best directed scene in this whole show is where Yugi is out front of the hospital. He learns what has happened. He gets mad and he storms back into the hospital, and we get all these shots of his shadow with the big Egyptian third eye on the top of the silhouette as he goes around. It's using like a 3D camera through CGI halls to show him storming back in. Fucking outstanding television. And that's before you even get to the fact that Ginga Banjo is our evil doctor. I mean, holy shit, not a Dragon Ball villain this time, but the OG Gundam villain, because that is, the original Giran Zabi. You've got Amano Yuri, who we also know from Gundam, where she is Rain in G-Fighter, and Keiko in Yu Yu Hakusho as Nurse Misaki, the one Jinochi has a crush on. And we've got Nea Michiko, the original Riza Hawkeye, however you want to say it,
yes.
Or Mao in Full Metal Panic as Shizuka. So just a fantastic guest cast. I love this episode.
Yeah, it is a very fun episode. Like, all this fucking golf shit. Like, I love that they take the sort of like trope of the evil or like lazy doctor / lawyer, because it's one or the other, who instead of doing what they're supposed to be doing, they're just spending all their time doing golf. I love that gets turned into your shadow game where they play golf in the hospital, and Yugi makes this like insane fucking bank shot that goes through like the vent or whatever that goes down like the fucking like dumbwaiter in the nurse's office and through this thing, and it's very ridiculous, but it's fun. And yeah, I like that you call out that really cool shot with the big camera movements and the shadow and the third eye thing, because I think in general, while the music for the transformations is not very good, or, it's fine. It's just not as good as it should be. The visuals for it typically are great. And I love the use of like the giant like silhouette of the shadow coming up and coming out of him with like the big glowing third eye in it and stuff like that. It's typically like a high point of the episodes visually when they do those.
Yeah.
And this is the best one of those for sure.
The one in the movie is also fantastic.
Yeah.
But for the TV show, this is the best one. Then episode 17 is another anime original story. It's called Close Call, A Bottle's Invitation. This is the third Game Master episode, and I think it's also great. This stretch of episodes is just fantastic. So this is a pretty straightforward one. It's built mostly around the game, Raijin High, which is pretty cool. The Game Master, Eileen Rao. There's this whole weird thing where she freezes Anzu in like a ballet pose and threatens to feed her to a tiger, so that's pretty nuts. But overall, there's a sobriety to this one by Yu-Gi-Oh! Standards that I like. Eileen is not a cartoon villain. She and Yugi have this sort of mutual respect by the end of the game where they're on opposite sides, but they like each other. Tominaga Mina plays Eileen. You would know her as Izumi Noa in Pat Labor, Nanao Kozue in Meison Ikoku, and Isono Katsuo in Sazai-san, but a very good, accomplished actor, and is just very good in this part. I think you could criticize some of the racial stereotyping that happens here, but there is also the flip side that Yugi is encountering someone whose games come from their ancient culture in a way his games come from Egypt, and I think that whole side of the story is also really interesting and cool. So overall, this is definitely the best of the Game Master episodes.
Yes, by far. Like the other Game Master ones, I don't think are particularly great. This one is awesome, and just there's a lot of great drama to the Raijin High game of the game of it's basically bluffing your opponent about which model are you going to play. And Yugi being able to sort of call her out and kind of freak her out and kind of beat her at her own game is really good. And yeah, there is something especially when you combine this with the subsequent episode, right? Which the next one is the one that has the Chinese game that's sort of a modulation of Mahjong. That there is this sort of when you put those two together, there's like this vision you can almost have of an alternate version of Yu-Gi-Oh! If the like dual monsters stuff didn't become a big thing. That would be more like, oh, you have other ancient spirits from other cultures, that it's not just Egypt coming in and they have their ancient games that you're playing. Almost that would make it more shonen jumpy in a typical way. It'd be almost like Shaman King-esque or whatever. It's like, here's all these like representatives from all these different cultures with their own games in a big tournament or something. That would be like a cool alternate reality version of Yu-Gi-Oh! If it had gone down a very different path. But it is an interesting dynamic that puts Yami Yugi in a different kind of register here. Because as you say, there's a mutual respect, which is not a thing that you have with almost any other Yu-Gi-Oh! Villain from this era, because they're all assholes. Whereas like Eileen is not an asshole. She's just an equally accomplished game player. Even if she does, like hypnotically freeze Anzu in place and threatens her to get eaten by a tiger, is a pretty extreme thing to do. But I kind of think she probably wouldn't have actually gone through with it, I think is the vibe you get. I think she would have, like, she's using that to force the game. But I bet if, like, push came to shove, she would have stopped the tiger. Or the tiger's probably a nice tiger and would just, have fun and wouldn't eat anybody, because that's, tigers don't just fucking indiscriminately maul people. They're animals like anything else. If you teach a tiger well, the tiger would be cool. So I think that's what would have happened, because I like Eileen.
I didn't know you had thought about this that much, but that's great. I imagine Eileen had to come up with some crazy scenario to get the job from Kaiba.
Yes.
I think Kaiba was like, you're really good at games, but can you create a Saw trap? I need people who can create Saw traps. This show I know predates the Saw movies, but that's the vibe you get,
Yes,
so, yeah.
it's Kaiba put it in the contract. He's like, no, I'm going to give you the tiger, and you have to use. Do I have to use the tiger? Yes, you have to use the tiger, or you don't get to be a game master. Okay.
Episode 18 is Don't Touch the Forbidden Game. This is based on the two-parter The Evil Dragon cards, chapters 46 to 47. One of my very favorite chapters in the manga. I actually think the game in this one, Dragon Cards, is my favorite game in the manga in a weird way. Like, it's really fucking cool. There's other, Duel Monsters is hard to compare it to, obviously. And then there's the whole Monster World, which I think is cool. But Monster World is just Dungeons and Dragons, obviously.
Yes.
So, but this is an interesting one. The episode adds quite a bit of content. It makes the Emori character, who we don't know much in the manga. It has scenes where Yugi gets to know him. We see Emori getting bullied several times, give him some of this, like, motivation for the harder-edged character he becomes, whereas he is just harder-edged at the start of the manga chapter. They also changed the game from Dragon Cards to Dragon Block to make it more visually resemble something like Mahjong or something like that. So it uses tiles and blocks instead of cards, and it has a field component. So it looks more like Mahjong. But the game itself is the same. Like, the rules are the same. The way the game progresses when they play it is the same. One other change is that in the manga, Emori knows about the Millennium Puzzle and the whole legend of the Guardian of Darkness, and he wants it for himself. So that's why he steals it from Yugi. That is a detail elided in the show. But otherwise, this basically gets all the beats from the chapter, and I think it's a pretty good episode.
Yeah, I like this one quite a bit. And I think there's just something that they do to, like, again, it's this feel of Emori's almost like this alternate version of Yugi who gets possessed by this other soul. And there's just something that, like, is interesting about that idea of that it not being an Egyptian one. That, like, would have been a cool thing to follow up on, of like, well, China has an ancient history of games. All cultures have ancient history of games. Where are my Babylonian game masters? Where's my Native American game master? I want to see what other ancient souls are there out there that are going to play some fucking wicked awesome games.
Indeed. Episode 19, The Great Melee, a popularity contest. This is an anime original story. It's another Kobayashi Yasuko one. It's one of probably her weaker ones because it's fairly bizarre, but it is fairly entertaining because basically everyone is doing this sort of popularity contest. It's really a beauty show. Jinochi tries to get in because he wants to win the ticket so he can get some money. Jinochi does dress up in drag at one point, and his drag name is Paparine Monroe, and I thought that was pretty fucking funny. You get a cameo by Bakura here in his first appearance on the show, because they bring him in a little earlier than he comes in the manga. And for our main characters that are our guest characters this time, we have Kaoruko, who is like the beautiful character who is Miho's main rival in the popularity contest. And she is voiced by Toma Yumi, who voiced Cecily Fairchild in Gundam F91. And then, I thought this was great, the student council VP who is simping for Kaoruko, he is voiced by Shioya Kozo, who you would know as Majin Buu, which means all of the major DBZ villains have appeared on this show other than Cell. Yeah. And why do we not get Norio Wakamoto on Yu-Gi-Oh? Come on.
Yeah, can we have a third Kaiba? This is just Wakamoto Norio. Blue eyes white dragon. Basto stream.
That should be if they ever do like an old man Kaiba thing, like a movie where Kaiba is now an old grizzled man still dueling. They should bring him in to voice old Kaiba. That'd be great.
Forget the Earth. This birth stream of destruction would destroy the entire solar system.
I did enjoy hearing Shio Yakozo here because he's just doing his Majin Buu voice, but as like this student council kid, it's completely bizarre. But yeah, this is, I don't think like a super memorable episode overall, but it's a decent like Miho themed episode.
Yes, this is another like we took a script from a non-used Sailor Moon episode and just put Yu-Gi-Oh characters into it. It's very much what this is.
That's totally fine. All right, episode 20. It's here, the strongest and final trump card. This is an anime original story. It is the fourth and final Game Master episode, but it does also adapt some Kaiba stuff. So it does adapt the flashback to Kaiba's origins from chapter 40 at the end of Death T, but it moves the flashback with Gozaburo Kaiba to the present day, where Kaiba does the whole like power seizure with the board of directors when Gozaburo comes back. In the manga, that is a flashback to where that happened, and then Gozaburo jumped out of the building and killed himself, and so Kaiba basically forced his adoptive father to commit suicide. In the anime, he does not jump out. He instead sort of looks out the window, gets vertigo, and passes out. But it is interesting to see that scene played out in full here. And then you have a character named Damon, who is the final game master, who is Kaiba's sort of like mentor butler figure, who Kaiba has kept alive through advanced medical science. It's very bizarre. Kaiba has a totally different butler who is much creepier in the manga. Yeah. So for the most part, this is original. Daimon is played by Saikachi Ryuji, who is just a very prolific anime character actor. And then as Gozaburo Kaiba, the father, we have Ishizuka Unsho, who has been in too many things to count, but two major roles would be Professor Oak and Jet Black, one from Pokemon, one from Cowboy Bebop. And I did enjoy hearing him as Papa Kaiba here.
Yeah, it makes you wonder if they were thinking, oh, there's a chance we might do more of this show eventually, and who knows, Kaiba's dad might become a character again at some point in other flashbacks or something, so let's get a big actor. Because Ishizuka Unsho is like a very big voice to get for a character who appears in one small scene in this episode. But yes. Yeah, like the first two Game Master ones, I don't think this episode's particularly great. It's probably better than the first two, but it's nowhere near as good as the third. And it is, and the Frankenstein's monster aspect of Daimon is like very weird and just feels like it doesn't quite fit in the world of Yu-Gi-Oh! Kind of the way that like the Magic Luck Boy just doesn't feel like a Yu-Gi-Oh! Thing. Weird butler being kept alive through magical science just is like not quite Yu-Gi-Oh's brand of weird. It's weird, but it's not the right kind of weird, I think.
Yeah, it's I enjoy it. I think the performances are good. There's some good little moments here. I don't think the anime team is good at writing Duel Monsters matches that aren't based on the manga, so I don't think the one here is very good. But yeah, you get some Kaiba stuff. This one also starts bringing in an idea that really isn't prevalent in the manga yet, that Kaiba does have a kinder side to him. In the manga, you just have Mokuba remembering that Kaiba became very cruel once they were adopted, because the way they were adopted is Gozaburo challenged little Kaiba at the orphanage to a chess game. And in the manga, the detail is that Kaiba chose to cheat there to get him and Mokuba out of the orphanage. But ever since cheating, his soul has kind of rotted away. But then in the Duelist Kingdom arc, they flesh out that early stuff and give Mokuba more memories, showing that Kaiba was a good brother at some point. And they bring some of that forward. So you can tell that they have read beyond volume 7 of the manga because it was out at this point. So even though, again, this show doesn't go that far, you can feel pieces of Duelist Kingdom still kind of leaking into this earlier stuff.
Yeah. It is like, it's cool to see some of that stuff come in here, but it's an episode on its own. It's not particularly memorable. But
then we have the 4 episodes that comprise the Death T arc. We have Although we kind of have to take them a little bit one by one, because this first one in particular is weird. So let's talk about episode 21, Complete the Ultimate Game Land. This one adapts 3 different chapters. It starts with jumping ahead to chapter 50, which is the first chapter of the Bakura arc, and it does the whole scene where Bakura is introduced to the gang as a new transfer student. All of that kind of stuff is taken directly from that chapter. Then the gang decides they want to hang out with Bakura, so they take him to the arcade. And we jump back to chapter 25, which is where there's this scene where they go to an arcade, they find that someone has gotten all the top scores, and their username is Kai. And who could that be? And it turns out to be Kaiba. The anime changes it to be it's Mokuba Kaiba, but in the chapter it is Seto. And then the B part of this episode comes back to the chapter for a story where you have the violent fighting game fanatic, the Bruce Lee guy, who Jinochi then kicks the shit out of, which is fun. But then in the middle, you could jump ahead to chapter 27, where you have the detail that Kaiba has kidnapped Yugi's grandpa and is demanding Yugi come to him, which changes the whole setup, basically, of how Death Tea happens, where in the manga they're first invited to his mansion on the pretense of friendship, and they play gourmet Russian roulette with Mokuba. All that stuff is elided, and it's all kind of combined into this episode that is both sort of doing the one-off story from chapter 25 and all of the setup for Death Tea stuff. It's kind of confusing to explain as an adaptation. I do like it as an episode, though. I think it works well. I think the Yugi is so freaked out at the insane lengths Kaiba has gone to. There's this line where Yugi's like, why would Kaiba do this to me? What did I do to him? And I kind of love that they give Yugi that moment and they have Oga to play it because, yeah, what the fuck did you do to him?
Yes.
Kaiba is an insane dude. And I love that Yugi is just he's so kind, he can't understand Kaiba. And so they kind of have him get, roused out of that stupor by what happens with the weird Bruce Lee dude and all of that stuff.
Yeah, I think it's an interesting, making really dynamic adaptational choices, but I definitely think it works quite well. I also just like the weird, fighting game stuff with the weird Bruce Lee dude. It is just very funny to me that, he points out the thing that, every single fighting game has its not Bruce Lee character, which is just true. It's true. Every major fighting game franchise has a character that is Bruce Lee without being Bruce Lee. And then you have this weird guy who is is once again voiced by Hiyama Hiei from Yu Yu Hakusho. So he comes back here all the way back from episode 2 to play the weird Bruce Lee dude. And yeah, then you get this is maybe Jinochi's coolest moment is him just beating the shit out of this dude and spraying him in the face with the Coke. All that stuff is very good. And I like what they do with Yugi's characters. You pointed out that they're using that plot line in order to get him to process, am I up to the task of dealing with the weird obsession of Kaiba and all this shit that's happening? Because his relationship with Kaiba in this show is fairly different than it was at the manga at this point, because in the manga, Kaiba has lost his mind because he spiritually died because Yugi fucked him up real hard. But he's been in the background since then, other than some of the Mokuba stuff. Whereas in this, it's more about Kaiba's obsessed by the fact that he could not beat this one kid, and so he has tasked his weird goons on Yugi over the course of weeks or months at this point that Yugi has kept on having to repeatedly deal with, all because Kaiba just wants to win. And it's fun to have Yugi sort of stands up to, okay, this is the time that I need to actually kind of stand up to this fight and go save my grandpa. And this is the episode that ends with them walking through the mist, right? With all the Yugi starts going alone because he's it's just me. I'm the only one who has to go. And then one by one, all the other characters come out of the mist as the ending theme plays. That's a great fucking little scene.
It's a great scene, and right before that scene, you also have another anime original scene of everybody mentally preparing for the showdown, including this nice scene where Anzu is preparing bento for everybody, which is just really sweet. And I love the ending of this episode gets you so hyped for the Death Tea stuff, which is then episodes 22, 23, and 24. It's kind of interesting how they break this down. Episode 22 does basically all of the Death Tea individual games, kind of puts them into one episode, and it elides several of them. So it does not do the whole electric chair challenge that is in the manga. It doesn't do the whole thing with the crazy killer in the fucking basement.
Murder
I don't know if
mansion.
you've gotten there. Sorry, what?
Yes, in the murder's
of the mansion.
Yes.
Yes, and there's the whole Leatherface basically comes out, and Jinochi has a chainsaw fight with him. It skips some of that sillier stuff, but it does do basically the laser tag game. It does the sort of initial scene where Grandpa is beat and gives the deck to Yugi, who promises to win. You've got the scene that is from the Murderer's Mansion, but is put somewhere else here, where there's the 4 numbers on the wall, and there's the levers, and there's the whole blood puzzle that Yugi has to solve with the numbers in his head. Though instead of the Haunted Mansion thing, where it's basically a saw trap where all their hands are stuck under a guillotine, now it's a big gear is coming to crush them, but otherwise it's the same basic challenge. And then that one ends with the big cube challenge that is where all the cubes are falling and are going to crush them and they have to climb up. And then that leads into episode 23. It continues and does that in a fairly direct adaptation, including Honda making a very dramatic sacrifice. Then it does the whole Capmon contest between Mokuba and Yugi, and again, very similar to what happens in the manga. And then in episode 24, you have the final duel between Yugi and Kaiba, and the only big change here is it brings back the Ryuichi Fuwa and Eileen Rao characters for a B-plot battle with Jinochi and Miho, but that is basically how they lay out the Death Tea stuff across these 3 episodes. What did you think of them, Sean?
I'm a little bit mixed on their Death Tea arc. Like,
I am too.
Yeah, there's good stuff in here, and there's also stuff where it's like, so for instance, like, let's just go episode by episode here. So we have episode 22 where you have like the range of the different games, and some of this stuff is fine. I'm very happy that they cut out Honda's weird pervert baby. That's like this little like that's so small that they like are carrying him in like a little like backpack thingy. I forget what those things are called. For an infant that can barely walk. And yet he's perving on Anzu, and it's just like very weird. They cut that character out, which is fucking, thank God they cut that character out.
Yeah,
I mean,
because in the manga, only Jinochi goes to Death Tea with Yugi, and then the other characters appear over time. Anzu has gotten a part-time job there, which is where she appears, and then Honda came because he was babysitting and the kid wanted to go to the theme park, and so that's how they all come together. They also use like the baby for a little John Woo hard-boiled reference during the whole laser tag game thing. But instead they actually changed that to Miho winning, and it's much better, I think, than the manga. So yeah, the part of it is just that they streamline it, and I think that stuff is a big improvement from the manga, is just having everybody go in together.
Yes, like I like that part of it, but there's something about like it. I don't think it like has the right energy or something, like, because partly the thing is that they, for like the laser tag game, it doesn't have the sense of the stakes of the like, if you get shot in the manga, you are going to die, basically. And there's just, I think like the feel of it feels slightly off. Death Tea in the manga, again, it's called Death Tea because it's the Death theme park, which is a death theme park that Kaiba has made for the explicit purpose of killing Yugi, and that's it. He doesn't even care about Yugi's friends because he doesn't even know they're going to be there. He just wants to kill Yugi. And he has spent hundreds of millions of dollars building a giant theme park specifically to do so. And so everything in the theme park is like themed around death and murder. And there's like a focus to that here it just feels a little generic to me. Like the challenges, even if like, I think the blood puzzle scene works fine. There's tension to that of like the machines coming down. You have to figure out the puzzle. It's not as insane and cool as the Murderer's Mansion. But it works. But I just think like it doesn't have the kind of dramatic oomph that you're wanting, especially like in the build up to it with all the heroes coming together. And like weirdly enough, I think it's actually the Bakura arc after this is the one that feels like it actually delivers on the momentum of we've all come together to face this big challenge. We all have to work together to do it, which is what the lead in to Death Tea in the anime is kind of like building to. And the actual execution of that arc in the anime it's just not quite there.
Yeah, I agree. And I think it's a couple of like chickens coming home to roost. It's like the fact that they changed Kaiba's backstory so he doesn't have that death experience means that you had to adapt Death Tea differently than what they did, I think.
Yes.
So there's that problem. Then there's the whole thing that this show doesn't really usually do the death-themed stakes. So, like, honestly, the thing with the giant cubes kind of comes out of nowhere because it's like, you guys don't kill people on this show. Like, what the fuck? Kaiba kind of went off the deep end here. So that kind of feels wrong. And then I also think in some of these episodes, I think, particularly the ones written by Inoue, the main series composer, I think he has a bad habit of putting too much in individual episodes in a couple of places. And I think particularly the final one here, the final duel between Yugi and Kaiba, that's all it should have been. The whole B-plot they add with Fuwa and Eileen Rao, it's like kind of bad on its own, but even if it were good, it takes too much time away, and they have to rush like hell through the end of that duel. And so, like, compare this to, like, episode 1 of the Duel Monsters anime, which does basically this same duel, and it is paced and, like, delivered so much better and more dramatically, and like is able to use visual storytelling language to let big moments land. And in this one, it's basically like, Exodia, I won, Kaiba, mind crush, let's leave. It's just like, we have to get out of here in like 10 seconds flat. And it kind of robs, I think, the end of Kaiba's arc in this show from a sense of denouement. And I think that's unfortunate.
Yeah, I agree. And it's particularly, I think the worst part is in that last episode of the arc, that B-plot just is, it's not good on its own. It's like a weird, like they're doing another fighting game thing, which is like, we already did the fighting game thing with the fake Bruce Lee character whole idea. And so I don't know why we're doing another fighting game thing. And it just doesn't match the energy of what's going on with Yugi, and it just sort of like distracts from that. Like, by far the best episode of this stretch is the middle of the 3, where you just have the Mokuba one. That's where you get a lot of really good stuff with Yugi, and he gets a lot of good material in that episode. I love all the stuff of like Kaiba being like, no, Mokuba, you lost, like you gotta face your punishment, and Yugi pulling him out. Like it's like that episode feels like it gets the most sort of like space to breathe and just be its own thing. Whereas the first episode is just having to rush through all these different challenges, and it just feels like they're throwing thing after thing after thing after you without building a plot out of it. And then the third one is so bogged down with the B plot, it's only the middle of the 3 that really works on its own.
Yeah, but I do want to shout out again that middle episode, episode 23, I do think is it has, I think, one of the best scenes in the show, which is as they're getting to Mokuba's stage, Yugi confessing about this other self he's scared of, and then coming to terms with it, and then the other self talking to everyone. It's really, really good, and all of that works great. And the whole, like, post-game confrontation between Yugi, Mokuba, and Seto, all of that is really fantastic. One other thing that I think is missed because of the lack of real death in Death Tea and, like, Kaiba's backstory is that in the manga, this is also a transitionary arc for Dark Yugi, where, like, all of the bad shit he's been doing to people comes back onto him. And while this is never made super explicit in the text, you can kind of feel that he reacts differently from this point forward, because what he does to Kaiba at the end isn't vengeful, it's merciful. He puts him in this state where he can, there's even a little illustration in the manga of like Kaiba's inner child picking the pieces back up, where the mind crush Yugi gives him is allowing Kaiba to rehabilitate himself and have a fresh start, rather than the purely vengeful things Yugi has been doing before. And that also the anime can't really do anything with, because it hasn't created the space for that contrast.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah. But then you have the final 3 episodes, episodes 25, 26, 27. I do like that in the title of episode 25, they just call Bakura a Bishonen. Just, it's just, and they call it in the translations, the handsome boy attacks. And it is just so funny. But yeah, these 3 episodes together adapts chapters 50 to 59, Millennium Enemy, parts 1 through 10. And I think for the most part, these are fantastic. I think they're really good. I had a little bit of an issue with episode 25 because it takes on about like 100 pages of manga. And I think it has to rush a bit too fast. And just like I had the manga open next to me while I was watching, and there's so many good moments of like paneling and impact in the manga that kind of have to be rushed through in the anime there, but I think it calms down enough in episodes 26 and 27 that stops being a problem. And again, you get to enjoy the just phenomenal performance of Bakura here. It's a really great final game to end the story on. This is one of my favorite stories. It is my favorite story in the Yu-Gi-Oh manga, and just getting to see it animated was an immense treat.
Yeah, absolutely. I feel like we almost like talked about it when we just went through with Bakura's voice, because that's just so much of the appeal of this is getting that dynamic. And I love the the D&D game details of it all. Is just like really well represented in that way of like it is D&D without exactly being D&D, the way that they have like the 2 different dice, and like that's how you do the rolls rather than having a single 20-sided die. You have the whole insane thing of the like special way you roll the dice. It's like, well, you put a big spin on one of them, and if you see that like your first die didn't get the number you want, then you just nudge the table with your knee or elbow, and then you hit the die with your second die, and that's like, okay. That's a bit much. And I feel like it would be very easy to catch someone cheating that way. Every single time they roll the die, one dice falls down immediately and the other is spinning like a fucking top, and they just keep on coughing and hitting the table really hard. It's very funny, some of like that stuff. But the dynamics of the game are so fun, and it gets the thing that I think is the thing that's so awesome about the story also in the manga, is the way it fundamentally shifts the main character's relationship to Yami Yugi, where he becomes the player, right? And so you have like Yugi and his friends on the table looking up and seeing Yami Yugi controlling them, and that's what makes it such a great finale for the show. And again, kind of a way better payoff for the moment of all of them coming together on the street, leading into Death Tea, is we are all one big team. We're all unified through our like bonds of friendship, and it's the whole fucking heart of the cards shit in Yu-Gi-Oh! Basically, it's the heart of the dice now. And Yami Yugi is separated out as another character, so it's truly all the characters together. And then the big thing is Bakura comes in first by fucking around with his shadow self, and then he becomes the priest character as a part of the main crew, and they defeat Zork. Like, that's just such a great plot and great arc. That's a great payoff to everything that had been built up. And it's a slightly different payoff in the anime than the manga, because they're slightly different stories, but it works so well for the anime version of the story as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Like, obviously there's more stories this anime could have told and things that are set up that, because it doesn't continue with the manga, don't come back. But this is a very satisfying finale to this 27-episode anime. You don't feel like you've been robbed of anything at the end, other than maybe getting to hear many more years of Ogata Megami playing Yugi. But anyway, a couple of things that I think are interesting in the adaptation. Like, one is that this is the most violent part of Yu-Gi-Oh! The TV show. It adapts the very grisly detail that the Millennium Ring spikes are there to dig into the person's flesh and prevent the wearer from taking it off. The second anime never shows that, but that is why the Millennium Ring has spikes on it. And if you've only seen the anime, you might wonder why it has those. Well, here you go. They dig into Bakura's flesh and he can't take it off. It also does the scene in the third episode where he fucking impales his hand on the tower, and I was sure they weren't going to show that in the anime based on some of the other things they had changed. So when they did that, I was like, holy crap, because I love that moment. I love, like, sharing that moment with people who haven't read the manga and going, no, this is the manga. And it's just Bakura just impaling his hand. It's bloodier in the manga than in the anime, but they still do it, and that was impressive. They have to add Miho into the story, and I think they do it very naturally. So they make a change early on where Miho becomes the first person who gets possessed and pulled into the game. In the manga, that's Anzu, but then it means that when Yugi demands to be pulled into the game with his friends, Anzu is there making that offer with him, and I kind of like that character dynamic there. Then in the second episode, there's that trap where they're in the tower, and it's like there's these spikes are coming down on the characters, and there's this like pedestal with a missing number on it, or it's numbers and a missing piece. And in the manga, Yugi basically just gets lucky and rolls the correct number, but in the anime, he rolls the wrong number. Bakura gloats about the right one, and then Miho uses her fairy powers to make it appear. And I thought that was a very good use of Miho. That's probably an improvement on what happens in the manga. So those are all the only real like big changes in here. Overall, it just follows the manga very closely. But those couple of little additions I think are very strong.
Yeah, it's just like a really, really good adaptation of those chapters from the manga, and like they're fucking great. Like you, that's is just I remember I haven't gotten to this part in my reread, but I remember reading this when I was a kid and being like, this is fucking awesome. Partially because I really liked Dungeons and Dragons back then as well. So I was like, yes, cool, Dungeons and Dragons shit in Yu-Gi-Oh! Like, that's one of the pleasures of early Yu-Gi-Oh! For me, is seeing what are traditionally American games like Magic the Gathering, Dungeons and Dragons, like the whole Spawn one, and seeing some of that, because clearly Takahashi had like a love for a lot of American media and American games as well as Japanese ones, and seeing those get adapted through the Japanese lens, I think is just very fun, and this is a good example of that.
In terms of our guest star for this arc, we do also have Iizuka Shozo as Zork. Zork looks doofy as shit, but he's got a great voice because this is the actor who played Ryu Jose in Gundam, Nappa in Dragon Ball Z, and about a billion other things stretching all the way back to Mighty Atom. He is an OG. He sadly passed away in 2023 at age 89, but I very much enjoyed hearing him here as the King of Darkness, Zork.
Yep. If there's going to be a King of Darkness, he should be called Sork.
Yep. One other little change is that they do, it has the same ending as the manga where Bakura comes to school having made this diorama of all their player pieces, but it adds a little speech about friendship to go with it to end the series on, and it's just a lovely note that feels like a very appropriate ending. And the last thing I wrote in my notes was I just wrote, I'm kind of sad this is over. And I don't know if I expected that, especially because I do think this show gets stronger overall as it goes. Particularly once you hit that middle stretch where it really hits its stride. And yeah, I don't know if after the first couple episodes I would have felt that way. But like by the end, I was like, man, I want more of this Yu-Gi-Oh! There's lots of other Yu-Gi-Oh! I can go watch. Let's not be clear. We're not like, starved for Yu-Gi-Oh!
Yes.
There's plenty I can go watch. I can watch a whole series about them dueling on motorcycles, and the fan community swears that's like maybe the best one. So one day I might have to watch it. But yeah, I want more of this Yu-Gi-Oh!, Sean.
Yeah, I was the exact same way. That like, again, the show has lots of rough edges. Like we haven't talked all that much about the production because I don't think it's that notable. It's like it's not a great looking show. It's got its moments, particularly in like we've talked about with like some of the transformation moments where it uses shadows in a way that's very dynamic and cool. But overall, the overall aesthetic of the show is not that great. It's got its kind of bum episodes here and there, particularly some of those Game Master episodes, and yet they're still charming in their own right. You still have fucking Vegeta doing a ridiculous Kansai accent with this dumb story about a boy who's super lucky, and they never do a twist on it. And there's something about the fact that that's what's wrong with it, is that they just didn't really write the last part of the plot line, and they just sort of let the episode just keep going. It's kind of charming in its own right. And so, yeah, especially as someone who has memories of a lot of fondness of this manga, I had that same reaction of like, I'm bummed it's over. Like, I'd love to see some more of this. I'd love, if they had, because there are plenty of chapters and stories that they never did. I'd love to see the Spawn one done. I would love to see, particularly the teppanyaki that blows up the guy's face. That one, it's a big missed opportunity they didn't adapt that one. Or the one early on where there's like the TV producer dude comes to the school to film a bowling documentary, and he pays his fucking AD to beat the shit out of kids to film for his bowling documentary, which is maybe the biggest asshole in the history of Yu-Gi-Oh! Is that guy, who later on in the fucking parking garage before Yami Yugi fucks his shit up, is mumbling to himself like, what should I do for ratings next time? Maybe I just kill someone and film it. Haha, just kidding. Which is the greatest fucking just dick thing to ever say. And before he gets to get his whole life ruined by Yami Yugi. So there's lots of assholes in Yu-Gi-Oh! That they didn't adapt, and it's a shame that they didn't get to make more.
Yeah, but, I'm glad we have what we have. If I were comparing, this and Yu-Gi-Oh! Duel Monsters, like, I'm not going to tell you which one is, like, better as an anime. They're very hard to compare for obvious reasons. But, like, Yu-Gi-Oh! Duel Monsters, it's the big kid on the block. It is more striking visually. It is more aesthetically coherent. It's got a big, sweeping soundtrack that's very memorable. It adapts these big, arcs. It's got duels that take 6 episodes to happen. It's the big show-stopping anime. But this is like the little Yu-Gi-Oh! That could. And you know what? There's something true to like Yugi's own spirit as a character that is kind of embodied in this show that is frankly held together with like duct tape and prayer. Like that you just kind of can't help but love. It's trying so hard.
Yes, I believe in the heart of the anime, Jonathan.
Well, speaking of anime, we got one more thing to talk about.
Yes.
Speaking of anime is the worst transition I could use on this show. It's the only fucking thing we talk about. I could do that for everything.
Yeah.
Speaking of, stupid, I'm sorry. Anyway, speaking of Yu-Gi-Oh! Anime, we also have the movie. This is the original Yu-Gi-Oh! The movie that was released in 1999. The title of the film is technically just Yu-Gi-Oh!, although on the VHS cover it has Eiga, the word for movie, written above it, which would be the same title treatment as K-On! The movie, which is Eiga K-On!, which does make me laugh, that you have Eiga Yu-Gi-Oh!, the same as Eiga K-On!. Anyway, this was released in March 1999, about 6 months after the show ended in October 1998. It played as part of the Toei Animation Spring 1999 Animation Fair in a triple feature with Dr. Slump, a Raleigh's Surprise Burn, and Digimon Adventure, the short film prequel to the series, which was the film directorial debut of Hosoda Mamoru. So we actually have that on Blu-ray now, that little film. Imagine watching that in a double feature with this Yu-Gi-Oh! Movie. That would actually be a pretty fun time at the theater. The screenplay is by Kobayashi Yasuko, who we've talked about already, the second most prolific writer on the TV series, who would later write the Dororo remake. And it was directed by Shimizu Junji, a prolific Toei artist, briefly directed One Piece, actually, the whole anime, and did several of the early One Piece movies. He did not work on the 1998 Yu-Gi-Oh!, but he did later do storyboards for Yu-Gi-Oh! Duel Monsters on episodes 19, 24, and 30. You had Araki and Himeno coming back to do character designs, and in this case, animation direction. And you'll see that they redesigned Kaiba here to more closely resemble the manga, and the design is very close to how they would draw him in the second anime, particularly how they draw his like big flowing cape thing. He looks really good. There's also a Dark Yugi transformation sequence in this one that is fucking sick. And I do have to say, I think that's my overall reaction to this movie, is that narratively, nothing to write home about. Oh God, it looks good. This is a really good looking little 30-minute movie. Like, it is very slick and well put together in a way the show doesn't usually get to be.
Oh yeah, 100%. I'm with you. That it's like, it's, you know, it's a 30-minute thing, and it has to spend some of that time just like being like, what is a Yu-Gi-Oh? You know, it kind of, you get those scenes early on for like, if you're someone who came here to watch Digimon Adventure or Dr. Slump, well, here's what a Yu-Gi-Oh is, if you don't know what that is yet. But like, it's definitely, it feels like it is here for eye candy first and foremost, really. And for that role, it serves itself quite well.
Like, I can definitely imagine myself turning this on in the future, because if I have 30 minutes and I want to hear this voice cast do some basic Yu-Gi-Oh stuff, because this is the most Midorikawa gets to do, like, later era Seto Kaiba stuff, and he's very good at it, and Megumi Ogata is very good doing what she does, and it looks fucking great. Like, yeah, it's a fun, like, it's a much better Yu-Gi-Oh movie than the American one from 2004, I'll tell you that much. Oh my God.
I mean, I haven't seen that one, so I have nothing to compare it to. This is the best Yu-Gi-Oh movie I've ever seen.
This does reuse the theme songs from the TV show. It has music by BMF. I do think the music is definitely a level up from the TV show. It's still not, like, phenomenal or anything, but it is notably better. Mm-hmm. And it is kind of fun. You also get to see that they use a bunch of things from Duelist Kingdom here. So a lot of the cards, including Red Eyes Black Dragon and the magical Silk Hat with the Dark Magician, all of that is taken from Duelist Kingdom. You have a cameo by Dinosaur Ryuzaki. You might know him as Rex Raptor, as Kaiba's first opponent. And you have the dual disc system that Kaiba uses, which is the OG, like, level 1 dual disc that he uses at Duelist Kingdom in the arc where he makes Yugi duel him and then he threatens to kill himself if he loses, because Kaiba is exactly that bitch. And it is that dual disc system. And it looks really fucking good here, like with the big cards like in front of them, and they're like picking them and sliding them up like it's sort of VR. It looks good. So I enjoyed seeing all of that too. And then as our guest star...
You describing that little thing with Kaiba and him threatening to kill himself just makes it even more clear how appropriate casting Hiro Yui as Kaiba is, because it's like, that is a very Kaiba move. That's also exactly what Hiro Yui would do. You know, that's basically what he does where he blows up his own fucking Wing Gundam in like episode 13 or 14. It's like, God, they're just like the same person.
It's so true. As our guest star, we have Yamada Eiko playing Aoyama Shogo, who is a little boy afraid of his cards. You might know Yamada Eiko as Mai in Dragon Ball, Tsubasa in the original Ranma 1/2, and Anne in Anne of Green Gables. She was also the lead in like a dozen other World Masterpiece Theater shows. Like, that was kind of her main calling card. And she's good here. Shogo is kind of a nothing burger of a character, and it's a very, you know, generic conflict here. But again, you have to remember what the purpose of a movie like this is, which... it's effectively a promo film for Toei's work on Yu-Gi-Oh! And the franchise itself. The same way, like, I think the Digimon Adventure short film is much better than this. Like, It's got an interesting story and stuff, but it also mainly exists to be like, ooh, Digimon, I want to watch the TV show. Now, that didn't really work for Toei with Yu-Gi-Oh! Because the license got pulled and given to someone else, so this wound up being their kind of last gasp with it. But I think it does the job fine for what it is. Like, I've seen much worse versions of this kind of thing.
Yeah, it is, though, like, it is very funny to me that the whole plot of this thing is about Shogo needing to, like, find his courage to fight because the Red Eyes Black Dragon, as they tell you, it's only 30 minutes long. Somehow they still find, like, 6 different ways to tell you this thing about, like, the Blue Eyes White Dragon brings the herald of victory, but the Red Eyes Black Dragon does not bring victory. It only brings the opportunity for victory. I just don't know how many times they could get that one line and how many different people can say it in a single 30-minute thing. But it's very funny to me that, like, Shogo does not actually duel. It's just
Yes.
Yugi. And it's like, well, no, Shogo, you have to get your fighting spirit back, which means you have to just cheer on Yugi, and then he'll use the Red Eyes Black Dragon to somehow, win this game. This is where, like, if you know the rules of Yu-Gi-Oh, it's very confusing of like, well, the Red Eyes Black Dragon's kind of a shit card. It's a worse card than the Dark Magician. Of course, he uses polymerization to fuse it or whatever with the Meteor Dragon and all that kind of stuff.
But they also invent a new card for Kaiba to use where he has the 3 Blue Eyes chained together but doesn't fuse them, because if he fused them, he would have Blue Eyes Ultimate Dragon, and there's nothing Red Eyes, no matter what fusion it uses, could ever do to beat Blue Eyes Ultimate Dragon. So I know I sound like a really sweaty middle school nerd here, but it was in the back of my mind, I was like, oh, that's why they invented this new chain card, because they can't have Kaiba do the Kaiba thing, because it makes no sense.
Yeah, it's like that part of the game, the duel is very weird, because the early part where they're pulling in the silk hat thing with the Dark Magician, I'm like, I remember this. Yeah, this is cool. It's like it's like reminds you why once like the series commits to the duel monster stuff, it's like that can be very dynamic and very interesting, and those duels can be cool. But then it gets into the like, I don't really understand what's happening. Like, I don't understand what it meant when Kaiba tied the Blue Eyes White Dragons together. Like, did that mean they had more attack power? Or like, cause it seemed like it made it impossible for Kaiba to win because he could only attack once, even though he had 3 monsters. And so he just kept on putting a card in defense position, and he just kept on blowing it up. It's like, well, if you had left them as 3 separate monsters, you would have won in like 2 seconds. I don't really understand. And then he could just fuse his Red Eyes Black Dragon, which also doesn't make sense, because that would have had to mean Yugi had the card that is the fusion for the Red Eyes Black Dragon and the Meteor Dragon, even when he didn't have the Red Eyes Black Dragon, but he fucking kept that shit around anyways. I don't know why he had the Meteor Dragon, that card, and fusion in his deck, but he didn't have the Red Eyes. It's very confusing. It's like that duel doesn't make any fucking sense.
It's fine. The main purpose there is to go, ooh, this looks nice. Ooh, those actors are fun. And it's over. That's 30 minutes, it's fine. So that is Yu-Gi-Oh! The original movie. That is Yu-Gi-Oh! The 1998 anime. Sean, this is an episode you and I know have wanted to do since, again, Japanimation Station started. Because, again, Takahashi died right as we were about to premiere this podcast, and we said, oh man, we should do something with Yu-Gi-Oh! This was the obvious answer, because this is the only Yu-Gi-Oh! Show we can review in one sitting, or watch in like 2 weeks, because all the other ones are very long. But I'm really glad we did this, Sean. I had so much fun putting the notes together and just going back down memory lane, reviewing the manga. And this was a great conversation, and this is a really cool show that people should definitely seek out.
Yeah, I'm with you, especially for me, as someone again who has not really engaged directly with any Yu-Gi-Oh stuff for like, oh my god, almost 20 years or something at this point. I mean, it's been a very, very long time for me because I'm now an old man. It has been very fun to kind of rediscover that Yu-Gi-Oh is good, and Yu-Gi-Oh can be good, particularly the manga. Which I'll continue reading as much as I can, and it is very fun. And yeah, I enjoyed this show tremendously. Yu-Gi-Oh's cool. But speaking of anime, Jonathan, next week we're also going to watch some anime. But actually, no, I can give you a better segue than speaking of anime. That's not hard to do. For this episode, Jonathan, we were talking about Yu-Gi-Oh!, which is the king of games. But next time, we're going to talk about a different kind of king, Jonathan. We're talking about the great king of Azumanga, whatever the fuck that is. We are talking about Azumanga Daioh, the animation, the animated adaptation of Azumanga Daioh, the manga, which is one of the OG great moe comedy manga, which we reference seemingly every other episode of KyoAni, in our KyoAni season, because it is like the granddaddy of things like K-On! And of things like Lucky Star. And we were talking about how Yu-Gi-Oh! This is the thing we've wanted to talk about a long time. I have been wanting to do Azumanga Daioh for a very long time on our podcast as well. And finally, the opportunity is here. So next time, we will be talking all things Azumanga Daioh, the animation.